Testing, testing.
Just an audio check.
We hear you. I'm echoing.
Testing. Testing. That's better.
Is that okay? Can we start? No? No? We buffer. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Electoral Area Services Committee of December 7th. And as the name suggests, I am still echoing. Let's deal with the echo first. Got it? Am I echoing? No. Okay. So the Electoral Services Area Services Committee is a committee of the board, and it's made up of electoral area directors who make recommendations to the board on issues related to land use and delivery of local government services in electoral areas. And we respectfully acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish and New Chalmouth people, and we offer gratitude to the First Nations for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. And we hope we are able to respectfully work in this committee with those teachings in mind. We have a wide-ranging agenda this afternoon, but first I want to we've got some community acknowledgements to make, some important ones. Maybe I'll start, I'm going to turn to Mike, but Director Wilson, but I will start first because I have a sad and unfortunate one to acknowledge that Jack Funk, who is a resident, who is a Cowichan Skeet and Trap longtime member in Salem, and the Trap and Skeet Club have worked really hard to raise money for community parks in the Salem area, and he died, so I'd just like to acknowledge that he put a lot of time and effort into that, and he'll be missed. And Mike has an acknowledgement as well.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, this is to acknowledge Jerry Giles, who was recently awarded the 2022 Rural Woman of the Year award from an organisation down in the south of Cowichan there. And it's well deserved. Jerry actually today is in hospital having knee surgery, so I wish her all the best, and hopefully she'll get better from that one as well. But congratulations to her on this well-deserved award. So well done, Jerry. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Jerry was at this table for a long time. Yeah. So we turn to the agenda, and we've got two new business items, both supplemental information to be added. MB1 is the Malahat Volunteer Fire Department Fire Services Review Report, prepared by Tim Play, and we're going to have a presentation on that shortly. And the other, MB2, is a supplemental information regarding item R2, and I believe it was some input from a community member. So is there any objection to approving the agenda as you see it? Okay. Let's move on to adoption of minutes. We don't need to. Adoption of minutes. Mike's moved it. Anyone seconding it? Yep. Everyone approving it? Anyone not? Move on. Business arising from the minutes. Public input period.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I'm Cliff Evans from Sharnigan Lake, and congratulations on your new job.
Thanks.
Madam Chair, on today's agenda, I see we have a delegation D2 by Gordon Anderson, and he's reviewing the Malahat Fire District situation. And a lot of the old directors here will all remember Elkington Forest and how it was going to be the dream place and the really nature place to live. And Elkington Forest was supposed to build the CVRD a lot of amenities. And apparently the original owner went broke. So it's gone through another owner, and this owner has had permission to build some houses before he built the amenities. And the old board here will know that these amenities and the homes were supposed to be built simultaneously. Guess what? There's 9 homes built, and I don't see one amenity up there. And I hope I hear on this delegation, I don't know what's coming up, but I hope I hear on this delegation that we finally get the fire hall that was one of the amenities that was supposed to be built. So, Madam Chair, I would ask this board to look into the Elkington situation to see what amenities have been built simultaneously like the old board promised. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Evans. Anyone else? No one else. All right, let's move on. So we're moving to delegations, and the first delegation, I think, is going to be introduced by Ms. Breen. Thank you.
Madam Chair, there's also an applicant in the lobby as part of this delegation.
Oh,
I'll just
perfect.
admit them.
Yes, please. And I think that this delegation is going to need more than the 10 minutes, including Coralie's going to give a brief introduction, and then maybe 20 minutes. Is that okay with everyone? Any objections? Oh, okay.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, directors, through the chair. It's my pleasure to introduce Lindsay Fryatt-Yorkie, who is with Dialogue Planning Consulting out of Vancouver. They have been working with us over the past year to develop a sequencing strategy for the local area plans, recommended approach for the electoral areas. Dialogue is an integrated design practice comprised of community planners, architects, landscape architects, interior designers, engineers, and sustainability experts. And I believe Lindsay is there on screen with us now. Thank you.
Coralie, Ms. Breen, could you give us a brief, just remind the new people where we've come from to get to the sequencing strategy?
Sure, my pleasure. So I'll try to do the 2-minute walkthrough of the last 5 years. 2018, 2019, we started the harmonization of 7 electoral area OCPs. In 2020, October 13th of 2020, an OCP, harmonized OCP for the electoral areas was adopted by the board. We have been in the process with the modernization of that OCP for the electoral areas since that time. We have been in the community through many consultation processes starting in February of 2020, open houses to confirm the vision and the policy direction for the new modernized OCP. And in the spring of this year, we had probably close to 30 community circle meetings, 18 of them which we led, and several other which were led through the community. And we have now recently embarked on something called the Ideas Fairs, which are the ideas from the inputs of the communities. Starting with electoral areas A, B, and C at Cobble Hill, which we held on November 6th with over 300 attendees. And we are in the process of planning 6 additional ones to go into all of the remaining electoral areas in February.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome, Lindsay, on the
Thank you.
screen. Sorry, looking in the wrong place. Go ahead.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. Today I'm here to share an overview of the local area plan sequencing strategy report. The document itself, as Corley mentioned, we have been working on over the last 11 months, personally with dialogue. And it outlines a scope of work for the local area plans, including what they contain, what the plan areas are. It provides a methodology for the process for each plan to undertake. And it identifies a strategy for how to undertake them between now and 2025. The recommendations have been informed by background and technical review, and also the community engagement that Corley referred to. So while the purpose of this document is to provide a strategy for delivering the local area plans, it should be considered as a guide and not a strict rule to follow in order to authentically engage with the CBRD community and to respond to the nuances of each area. And as we learn through the process, there will need to be some flexibility. And we already have started to hear some feedback on the draft report, so thank you to those who have sent feedback. And you'll see in the presentation that some of the areas that we're representing are different from what's in the report, and that's representing that we've already started to integrate some of that feedback. I have a presentation to share. I'm just going to share content now. Okay. Are you able to see that screen?
Yep, looks good.
Can't see my videos. Okay, great, thank you. So I intend to keep this presentation to about 10 minutes so that we have time for discussion. There is a lot of content to cover, so apologies if I am going through some components quite quickly, but hopefully we can then talk about them. So before I get too far, what are the local area plans and why are we doing them? These plans provide area-specific direction. They build on the regional vision and objectives and policy that is set out in other schedules of the OCP. And they guide growth in village and community hearts so that the qualities of these areas that people love and cherish are preserved and enhanced into the future. They also provide policies on community amenities, the open space network, heritage assets, community identity, and character. So in this presentation, I'll walk you through the local area plan methodology, the planning areas, and then a recommended sequence and timeline. So diving right into the local area plan methodology, each local area plan process will include 3 steps. Step 1 includes the review of an analysis of the current conditions and background material. We'll look at census data to understand the community profile, summarize housing and industrial demand, review existing background materials, including any existing statements of significance, studies, design struts, or past vision statements that have been created. We'll then engage with the community to understand what should be carried forward into the local area plans and what is missing. Working with the community, we'll begin to identify priorities as well. So at the end of step 1, we'll have a presentation to the board of directors and a future statement for consideration for adoption. In step 2, we'll begin to draft the plan. This includes draft objectives and policies and an area concept diagram. We'll also start working on development permit area guidelines. At the end of step 2, we'll engage the community again to share the draft and gather their input to inform refinement in step 3. So in step 3, we'll refine the plan. And then we'll also draft an action plan and monitoring tools. And then we'll present the plan to the board of directors for adoption. So those 3 steps represent, in a nutshell, what each local area plan process would look like. So what are the planning areas? We have identified 9 draft planning areas. These have been identified as they are important to the culture and identity of each area. They are, in some ways, you might consider them the hearts of our communities. And they are also generally areas where more growth is anticipated, because the local area plans has the potential to help guide that growth. So I'll walk you through them in more detail. But just as a high level, as you can see, areas E, D, F, and H have more than one planning node. And there might be some areas that you would expect to see in this list that are not included. That's because these areas would be the focus of other types of plans in the future, such as agriculture, industrial, marine, or potentially a special study area. And note that also areas A, B, and C are being recommended for a consolidated plan. Through community input, we heard that there's an interest in a master plan for these areas. So another option would be to keep the local area plans for those separate. So with 9 different areas to plan for, it was important to identify a strategy for how to deliver these plans, to balance the overall timeline and effort with meaningful opportunities for the plans to be shaped by the community. So the first approach we considered was an all-together approach. In this approach, all local area plans are developed through all steps together at the same time. The benefit is that all areas have a future statement adopted and reflected in the OCP early on. However, a constraint is that it would be quite complex to manage all of these area plans at once, and a bit of a strain on budget and resources that would be required to achieve this. So another option would be to undertake groups of plans consecutively. In this approach, areas could be divided into 3 groups, and then group 1 would undertake steps 1 to 3, and then group 2, and so on. So the benefit is that this would better align with planning effort with available resources. And group 1 plans would be presented for adoption early on within a relatively short time frame. However, group 2 and 3 plans would not be reflected in the OCP for quite some time. So what we're recommending is a hybrid approach. In this approach, all areas progress through step 1 together, and a future statement is presented for adoption. Then process groupings, group 1, 2, and 3, progress through steps 2 and 3 consecutively. So the benefit is that all areas would be reflected in the OCP early on with a future statement, and then staged plan groupings for steps 2 and 3 would align with efforts with available resources. This approach requires process groupings, and so we started to look at what areas should be grouped together. We identified the following groups based on geographic proximity and also potential for similar or shared planning direction. Plan area overview. So I'll walk you through the identified draft plan areas within each group. In order to reserve time, I am going to go through these fairly quickly. But just a little bit before I dive in about how they were identified. They were first drafted by the planning team and then shared with the community for feedback. They were then updated based on what was heard, and then refined with technical considerations, making sure that we would be able to analyze these areas from a census data perspective. And then they were again shared with the community for feedback and updated. So as noted, the specific boundaries are draft, and we would expect that they would be further refined as a part of each local area planning process. So group A, B, and C has been identified for A group. During community engagement, we heard that there's an interest to see these areas planned together as a whole, with opportunities to further knit them together from transportation perspective in particular, and that there's an interest in a potential future master plan for these areas. The next group is area D, E, F, and I. D, E, F, and I includes an area plan for Salem. Sorry, there we go. As well as an area plan for Eagle Heights and Coxsila Business Park area, and for the Cowichan Bay area. And finally, this group includes a plan for Honeymoon Bay and Missachi Lake and Yubao. Group G and F would include an area plan for Saltaire, Yellow Point, and Diamond. Sequencing ranking refers to the process of identifying which group of plans should come first, second, or third. To identify a sequence, we undertook background and technical review to understand the opportunities and constraints within each area from 6 different lenses. Since the specific planning areas were still being identified and in a state of flux, we needed to draw a line to frame this analysis. So we used the electoral area boundaries to consider ranking through these lenses. So I'll walk you through the key takeaways and rankings that were applied to each area as a part of the background review. From the planning context perspective, as many of you likely know, the CBRD underwent village design charrette process for Cobble Hill, Cowichan Bay, and Shawnigan Lake. So the outcome of these design charrettes provide planning direction for the planning direction that other areas lack. So without a design charrette to guide development in those other areas, they were ranked a little bit higher as a medium. There's a desire to see a master plan developed for electoral areas A, B, and C. the local area plans would provide the basis for the future development of a master plan. So completing the local area plans in the near term would allow for that future work to take place, giving areas A, B, and C a bit of a bump up to a higher ranking. Given that Area A has no design charrette and that Area A is needed to provide the basis for the master plan, it ranks as high. Areas B and C each have a design charrette. However, they also needed to inform the master plan, so they are ranked as medium. And then Area D has a design charrette to guide development, and it is not needed for a master plan, so it is ranked as low. From an industrial demand perspective, there's a great need for industrial lands throughout the CBRD. It provides a vital role in supporting the local economy. And there are only a few areas that are identified as industrial lands that meet the site requirements of light industries. Areas C, E, F, and I all provide some of the best opportunities in CBRD. Local area plans will be important for identifying the ways in which these industrial lands can integrate with surrounding uses in a positive way. Areas with more industrial land growth potential are ranked as high, and all other areas are ranked as low from an industrial land demand perspective. Oh, sorry, I went the wrong way there. There we go, housing demand. Areas that are anticipated to have a higher demand for new homes are considered to be in a more immediate need for a local area plan to guide that growth. So areas with projections above 150 units are ranked as high, with projections between 100 and 149 units are ranked as medium, and with projections below 100 are ranked as low. From a water and sanitary perspective, existing and proposed civil infrastructure is a major factor in growth of the electoral areas. Electoral Area A is deemed to be the only area with a high ranking due to existing sanitary capacity. Electoral Area B is ranked as medium because it has growth potential, with a possible connection to the new Mill Bay sanitary plant, and the existing sanitary infrastructure requires maintenance. Electoral Area C has sanitary growth potential, but little housing demand projections, so it is therefore lower on the ranking. And the rest of the electoral areas have low ranking based on sanitary capacity. Local area plans will help to identify priorities for transportation supportive amenities and will help to align aspects of community design, such as trail and network planning with transit service. Areas A, B, C, and D already have a density that could be serviced by transit, and therefore they're ranked as high. The town of Ladysmith is exploring transportation options within and beyond its boundaries, which provides an opportunity to align local area plan policies within this broader transportation context. Therefore, Area G has a medium ranking. And with less growth driving transit-related changes, areas E, F, H, and I are ranked as low from this perspective. There is one area, Electoral Area A, Mill Bay, where there is a known opportunity to collaborate with Malahat Nation on current planning initiatives. It has therefore been ranked as medium. This table summarizes the outcomes of the background review and ranking process. A high ranking receives 10 points to indicate that a local area plan should be prioritized in the near term to address that key issue related to that topic area. A medium receives 5 points, and a low ranking receives 1 point to indicate that a local area plan is less pressing from that lens. So when we look at this by group, the overall points were tallied, and then they were also adjusted to account for the different number of electoral areas within each group. So based on this, area ABC is group 1, DEFI is group 2, and GH is group 3. The recommended sequence and timeline would be completed by 2025. In 2023, all groups would progress through step 1 with a future statement prepared for adoption. And then each process grouping will progress through steps 2 and 3 between 2024 and 2025. This timeline balances the overall process length with the resources that are available and CBRD budget cycles, and also seasonal cycles to allow for well-timed community engagement. That's the end of my presentation, so hopefully we still have a few minutes for discussion.
We do, thank you so much. Do we have any questions? Director Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking at the wrong screen here. Could we go back to that slide on housing demand, please? Just a quick query on that one if we can, if that's possible.
Sure. See if I can just scroll here. This one here.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just trying to make that larger for you.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the high rankings there. Oh, it's gone. There it is. It's back again. Basically, in area A, sorry, okay. Because as I understand it then, there is another section there which is water and sanitary context, which should tie in with that. Because 230 units in area A, do we have the kind of water supply that will support that? I know in area C, we certainly have the right kind of supplies. And I think in area B, they have the right kind of supplies. But I think area A, what's been addressed as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, this is really looking at housing demand. And then the water and sanitary is meant to look just at the potential for water and sanitary rather than the housing demand.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Director
And I
Morrison?
might,
Oh, sorry. Carry on.
oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I was just going to add that I know Coralie and team in their work on the land uses have been aligning those with water and sanitary potential.
Thank you. Director Morrison?
Thank you. And my question is in regards to that sanitary slide that you brought forward. And I'm curious how, and you said potential. I'm curious how F ended up in the low area, because not only do we have the one of the communities within that area on sanitary, but we've essentially got 4 times the current number of homes in the area. We've got potential to service those with sanitary. So if you're talking about potential, I'm curious as to how area F got into the low category when there's, essentially with the purchase of a treatment plant, there's more capacity than we'll build out in 30 years.
So it ended up in the low category based on our understanding of the capacity. So if there is additional capacity there that we're not aware of, or then it would need to be incorporated. But I have to admit that I've looked at the planning lens, and our team members who were involved in the analysis from water and sanitary aren't present to comment, unfortunately. So, we can follow up with you and look at that, certainly.
Please do. Thank you.
Director Acton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for walking us through that. I had a question on the sequence ranking for the industrial area one for area B. It says it's ranked as low, so I'm just wondering what put area B in a low category and what that means.
So I'm just going back to my notes here. So we looked at, for the industrial, the lands that are designated as industrial land within CBRD, and also meet the site requirements of light industries. So areas C, E, F, and I were identified as all having both lands that were identified for light industrial that meet the site requirements, such as size and slope. And so those ones were ranked as high because there's more potential from those considerations compared to other areas.
Other questions? Director Martman, I don't want to miss you. So wave a lot. Anything else? Go ahead, Director Acton.
Thank you. I have another one for under the local area plan that Director Wilson called up. It's, oh no, so it says no, sorry, I think under the water and sanitation ranking, the area B was placed as medium, so I'm just not understanding exactly, do you mean that there is a medium amount of water and sewer happening, or like, is that just what we have, or how is that, what does that grading medium mean?
No, great question. So, high, medium, and low really refers to kind of how pressing a local area plan is from that lens. So, if there's a lot of growth potential because there is a lot of water and sanitary capacity, then it would be ranked as high. If there's, and ranked as high, meaning that a local area plan would help be useful to direct growth. So the high, medium, and low is really referring to how pressing a local area plan is, and not necessarily that category, but they are kind of interrelated, as you note. So electoral area B is ranked as medium because there is a possible connection to the new Mill Bay sanitary plant. And there would also be, if there was growth, some potential to improve existing sanitary infrastructure, which requires maintenance. And so it was given a medium ranking.
Okay, just one more question then. You know, you talked about a master plan for A, B, and C. Area B and C both have charrette plans, which really drill down really small areas of potential or planning direction. So, and you mentioned that those kind of gave areas a less urgency for an area plan. So, curious why it's not being suggested that we just go straight to a master, ABC master plan instead of doing area plans for them first.
We are recommending that it's a kind of consolidated area plan for those. So the consolidated area plan would look at the three together as one area holistically. And then if there was desire for a master plan, that would get into another level of detail that would go beyond local area plans.
So you are suggesting an ABC local area plan instead of
That's right.
separate ones? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Director Martman.
Thank you. I'm going to try to take my hand down. Thank you for the presentation and the explanation of how you would look forward to sequencing through the ranking. I'd like to take us back, though, to the beginning where you mentioned about there's another option. Because while this makes sense, and I can see the practicality of it, my community has an urgency around this. And so I see this being delayed for my community being a couple years into 2025. And while we may not rank as high, I think our needs are there in a different way. And so can you talk a little bit more about the demands that option, I'm going to call it option one, about doing this all at once? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Just from a practical perspective, undertaking 9 area plans at once is a tremendous effort. When you think about, hosting community events in 9 different areas, it's simply just from a practical perspective of having the people and budget available to be in person engaging in all of these areas. So really, I mean, it certainly is, would be possible to undertake a kind of all-together approach.
And a follow-up, if I may?
Yep. Please.
And through all your thinking, did you think of any other options between this one and the sequencing one that you'd mentioned?
Yeah, so we thought about the all-together approach where they all progress together, grouping, and then this hybrid approach. We did look at some other options. And I don't have any comment on the details of those that I think would be valuable at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You know, I think we've got a huge challenge. We've got a large area, and it's impossible to do everything all at once. And, I mean, I share Director Martman's concerns because I don't think that this type of analysis really pointed to some of the issues that we need to address, like water, very successfully. And when we looked at Area E, we've got two local area planning areas proposed, and they're very, very different, with very different issues. And then, so combining them as one electoral area just kind of washed it all away. But regardless of all that, we need to press forward, and we need to decide who's going to go first, and it's only going to be over a 3-year period, so it will all the work will get done. And from my perspective, the more important question is, how is this going to dovetail with the zoning bylaw modernization and timing? Because we can do all the policy work in the world, but the rubber doesn't hit the road on when we make decisions until we get those zoning bylaws modernized. And so I hope staff bring forward some information soon about that, because it also has budget implications. And so we need to think about that as one picture. And Mr. Tippett's waving his hand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We intend to bring a report, work plan, and other documentation related to the zoning project to this committee either in late January or the beginning of February for your consideration. Our intent at this point is to create a zoning bylaw on the basis of the current policy framework that exists today. And then as elements of the MOCP come on stream, if the zoning actually precedes the adoption of any element of the MOCP update with a comprehensive series of amendments, the zoning bylaw in accordance with the MOCP product that comes on stream. And we're also paying attention to the draft MOCP during the drafting of the zoning in any case. So I think maybe part of your question was in relation to the timing. Do we have to wait until the end of 2025 for zoning? I think the answer to that is I don't think so. It should be a lot quicker than that. So we'll get into more depth when we have that report out at the very beginning part of next year.
That's great news. Thank you. Anyone else? Director Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think I'd like to sort of reiterate a little bit about the just the capacity on the sewer side, and also to note that you know, a lot of work has been done by our engineering staff to ensure that there's capacity in specifically I'm referring to the Honeymoon Bay, Massachi Lake area. You know, we've got I think somewhere in the neighborhood of a $500,000 storage tank going in Massachi Lake, and my perspective is we're not only positioned in that we have the potential capacity for sewer, we are you know, embarrassingly rich in our water supplies, and that's a great thing to have. But I also want to you know, promote the notion that this community has essentially gone from a surplus of buildable lots a half a dozen years ago to there hasn't been an available lot for building in 3 or 4 years. And there's that demand. We all are talking about the ability to bring new housing on stream because of the affordable housing crisis. And so I'm going to suggest again and reiterate that I think some of the rankings may need to be adjusted and reprioritized. Part of my time here has been watching as Electoral Area D and Shawnigan and other areas have done their charrettes and done their planning exercises, where my community is essentially stood back, and it's been acknowledged that that's where the growth has been. But recent census reports have come out, and that lack of the ability for my community to grow where we've got the infrastructure in place, I think that needs to be addressed. So I think our timing and sequencing may need to be adjusted on this, and look forward to hearing any changes that may come forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess we get to talk about this a little bit later again. So if there are no more questions, nope. I'd like to thank you very much for coming, Lindsay, and we'll look
Thank you for
forward
having me.
to talking to you soon.
Bye, everyone.
And we have another delegation. We have to switch topics now to fire halls, I believe. And Gordon Anderson is here, and Mr. Postings is going to introduce him. Thank you, Mr. Postings.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Directors. So today we have the pleasure of having Gordon Anderson from Tim Ply and Associates come present the report relating to the Malahat Fire Service area. So I'll let him speak to that. He has a presentation for that. One thing I just wanted to note that you've received a copy of the report. The staff are intending to come back to the committee here with an implementation plan in the report. There's a number of recommendations there, so we will be coming forward with a plan that outlines what that implementation looks like in the near future here. So I just want to share that before I pass it over to Mr. Anderson.
Great, thank you. Mr. Anderson, how much time do you think you'll need?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The presentation was geared for about 15 minutes. I understand it's only maybe 10 allocated, so.
You can have what, if you need 15, just say so.
Oh, I think about 15 would be appropriate.
Is that okay, everyone? Sorry?
Yeah.
No objections? Okay. Go for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There we go. Oh. Just waiting for the screen to come up here. Okay. Sorry? I believe I can click, yeah. Yeah, seems to be working, yeah. Thank you. Great. Thank you for the opportunity to provide you with a short presentation and also to respond to any questions at the end of it. Tim Ply and Associates, it's an independent consulting collective, if you will, of associates that are doing work primarily in the fire and the governance type matters throughout BC. Sorry, I'm just going to find my scroll thing on this thing here for my notes. The members on this project, I was the project lead for it, and we had 5 different individuals involved, and the backgrounds of those individuals range from being former fire chiefs, chief administrative officers, and myself as fire commissioner at one point, and also we have a former lawyer on our group as well. We engaged in this to conduct the fire service review with the understanding that of the growth that's been going on within the area of the Malahat Fire Service Protection Area, and to have an, have an external look at the fire department's capacity to expand with the growth that's going on through the residential and some commercial sectors. And also to look at whether or not a satellite fire hall would be required to address the expansion of the service area. So in terms of what a fire service review looks at or provides, we look at a number of different areas. We look at administration and operations, which is a combination of different things such as the regulatory requirements related to record keeping, occupational health and safety, the statutory requirements and regulations, the firefighter training standards. We look at the fire halls, the apparatus, the equipment, the staffing required to meet the requirements, operational guidelines within the department, all of the things that are needed for delivering the identified services. We also look to determine what sort of gaps or challenges exist within the fire service in the area, and then we look for opportunities to try to address those. And sometimes those things are related to either equipment or processes, those sorts of things that need to be addressed. Along with that is opportunities that may exist. So we're looking at any areas that may provide some possible improvements or alternative approaches to dealing with any of the issues that we get identified. And we look at consideration of the future needs with related to expected development. We're just hearing about the community planning portion of it. So we look at towards what sort of development is known at the particular time or other factors that come in that may present opportunities. And then finally, we look at the different options that are available, because often there's more than one possible solution to whatever issues it is that you're addressing, in this case, the fire service expansion area. And then we try to assess those options and then provide some feedback that's going to assist in terms of an informed decision-making process. So the work commenced on this project earlier in 2022, and we recently completed the work as it shows on the slide there. These reviews are periodically undertaken with regards to the delivery of services to ensure that the requirements that I mentioned are all being met. They're often used to assess either existing or proposed changes to the fire service or the type of services being provided, and also to expansion of service areas, as in this case. So on this particular project, TPA, as we refer to, Tim Ply and Associates, is engaged to review the department in the context of the expansion of the service area, in regards to the development in the southwest area, which is commonly known as the Goldstream Heights. So the community itself has evolved. We looked at it going back over a little bit of the history, and obviously the expansion from where it was 30, 40 years ago, and the community has been gradually expanding in the residential area, but it's also had some commercial expansion in different segments as well. So we look at the expansion of these different sectors. And the documents that we do as part of our overall review, as I mentioned, looks at a lot of things. We look at the bylaws that you have in place, and those are the service establishment bylaws for the fire department, the operational bylaw that allows it to deliver the services and so on. We look at service agreements, mutual aid agreements, budgetary and financial documents. We look at the training that's done by the fire department and its related records. We look at the response data, in other words, the dispatch, the times to respond and the number of calls, that sort of thing. Occupational health and safety, and one of the areas I'm going to touch on a little bit more, which is fire underwriters, which relates to the fire insurance that people get. We're also looking at in the documents the new and pending changes that are coming up. There's a new Fire Safety Act that's pending and expected in the near future, and the fire training standard was recently updated, and I'll speak to both of these in a subsequent slide here. Part of the process also included doing interviews, so we met in a group meeting with the fire department, so most of the members were able to be present, and we were able to hear firsthand from them their feedback and their input about the fire department, the service, any gaps or challenges, things that they feel need to be addressed. So we've got it from the working level of the department. We also spent a full day with the fire chief and the deputy chief, and we went through and toured all of the existing facilities they have at the Malahat Fire Hall. We went out, looked at the service area that exists now and the proposed service area, expanded service area, to have a look at what the ground level of that looks like as well. And the idea behind this is to understand the administrative challenges and the operational challenges the department is facing. Subsequent to that, we later on in the process met with the regional district staff in some of the other departments to get feedback from them on the preliminary report that we had compiled to that point in time, to hear from them in terms of their feedback and the implications, to make sure nothing was missed in that regard. And in general, just wanted to thank both the Malahat Fire Department members and the CBRD staff, because the positive attitude and supportive participation that they had in the process made it a lot easier. So we really appreciated that. The site visits, part of the reason for doing site visits, as I mentioned, we toured the areas and so on, but is to appreciate the distances, the topography, and some of the current challenges that are being faced by the department. For example, when you get into the Goldstream Heights areas, there's significant elevations involved that don't exist in other areas, and significant grades to the roads, those kinds of things that impact the fire service and its delivery. And we also look at the condition of the different assets, the fire hall, the apparatus, the equipment, and so on, the turnout gear. In the end, the final report was delivered in November, and what it provides is an overview of the current state of the department. It gives recommendations to address the identified challenges and gaps that we've noticed in the course of the work. And it also has an understanding of the impact of adding the new service area, and then addresses the options to address the impacts that we've identified through this process. So you can see on the screen there that's just a photograph of the existing fire hall, and it's on Whitaker Road, so you'll hear me refer to the Whitaker Road Hall. That's the one and only fire hall for the Malahat Fire Department. In our process of going through all the visits and interviews and research we did, what we did find obviously was that there was a group of very dedicated men and women serving the community in the fire service. The staffing level itself would be considered borderline in terms of being able to meet the needs and requirements of the fire service. The fire department is challenged in terms of being able to recruit enough people to adequately account for natural attrition of firefighters over time, and also to be able to grow the department at any point in time. But I'd emphasize this is a common issue to all volunteer fire departments, not just here in BC, actually throughout North America, the whole recruitment of volunteer piece and retention of them in particular. So what we also found was that they've got good equipment in terms of apparatus and whatnot, but it's aging. So there's part of the recommendations in the report will deal with the aspects around that piece of it. But while they have decent equipment at the moment, albeit older, they are operating from a fire hall that's basically at the end of its operating life. So there's a number of different issues that need to be addressed. Some of the sort of the more notable ones, I guess, with regards to the fire hall itself were the issue of a lack of adequate space both in and around the fire hall itself in order to conduct operations, do adequate training, and a lack of water supply to the hall itself for those purposes as well. The hall itself is not centrally located anymore for the current and evolving development in terms of where it is in terms of response capabilities. And the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure has a proposed plan to change the Highway 1 access in and around the area there, which will affect the effectiveness of the current location of the fire department or the fire hall. And the residential growth that's been occurring has also now, particularly in that southwest sector, has the response distances now that exceed the fire underwriters' requirements in terms of getting beneficial fire insurance ratings. So in other words, the areas that are outside the fire protection area or outside the distances, which I'll speak to in a second, they would not receive the beneficial insurance rates that the others would that are within the capabilities. So here we just have a map just designed to give you an idea of what we're talking about in terms of the overall area. You'll see the red icon there with a little fire truck on it. That indicates the Whitaker Road Fire Hall where it exists right now. You'll see two sets of polygons. One's in red, one's in sort of a darker, almost purple kind of color. The red polygon there, it indicates what is within 5 kilometers of road travel distance, and that's important. It's not as a crow flies, it's as terms of how you have to travel to get there by roads. So the 5 kilometer distance is the one that gives a beneficial rate for commercial properties. So if you have a business that's operating and you're within that 5 kilometer, you'll get a beneficial rate from the fire underwriters for your insurance. If you're outside of it, you don't get the benefit. Probably more importantly for the vast majority is the purple, which is the 8 kilometers. That 8 kilometers for residential properties. So those that are classified as residential, within the 8 kilometers, they get a much more beneficial rating in terms of their fire insurance. And the fire insurance can be pretty substantial. I didn't bring a bunch of stats, there wasn't time to be going through that, but it is a significant thing from a householder perspective. You'll see here, and I'll just use see if this laser pointer will work for us. You'll notice that, let's see if it's working. Nope. Hang on a sec. There we go. You'll see here, this gold area that I'm highlighting and this gold area over in here, those are part of the current fire service area. So in other words, the fire department does not respond to areas outside of that gold. That is outside of their fire response area. And you'll notice the polygons here and where the pointer is at the moment, that's the extent of the 8 kilometers. Anything past that point by road does not get any fire benefit from the fire insurance perspective. With respect to the southern end on the Highway 1, you'll notice here where the color changes from gold, that's the boundary with the CRD, Capital Regional District. And the Malahat Fire Department has a service agreement to provide fire protection to this area down through this shaded part here, which is actually part of the CRD. And the 8 kilometer travel distance, you'll see where it goes to where the pointer is at the moment. That's the extent of the properties in that area that would still get that 8 kilometer benefit by virtue of the agreement. And going to the northeast here, the 5K takes you most of the way towards your boundary, which is just slightly off the map here with the the next outside the fire service area up into the Mill Bay Fire Service area. But the 5 kilometers gets most of the direction there, and the 8 kilometers goes well past that. And the same into Shawnigan here. You'll see that the 8 kilometers goes up well up towards the lake itself, so it's outside of the area. Okay. And happy to come back and answer questions on this as well, obviously. So just understanding that really broadly, and the next map will sort of put things into a little bit of context as well. But one of the things I wanted to mention is that the infrastructure requirements when you're looking at fire halls and so on, you need to have that strategic view and a broad consideration of the different impacts that are going to be had for the future as well as the current. So a couple of the impacts right now are the Goldstream Heights, the build out of residential properties in that general area, and also Millstream Fire Department has a hall number 3 that's planned for the area near Bamberton. And I've talked to the fire chief down there, and that process is moving along. And where that impact comes in is that they provide mutual aid to Malahat along the corridor of the highway there. And if they build a number 3 hall, that improves both mutual aid, and if you look at automatic aid throughout the CVRD, which they're doing, currently having discussions, I understand, that will also improve the value of the automatic aid and the fire underwriters that goes with those things as well. On this one here, you'll see the same map again on the left indicating the current hall, same information shown there. What you'll see on the right side now is the gold area now incorporates all of that area that was previously excluded in the left-hand map, and that's the expansion of the service area that we're referring to. So with the right-hand map, you'll see there's a new little fire hall icon right here, and what that's marked on the map there is a CGI fire hall proposed site. CGI just comes from a name that was used in a report back in 2008 from it was the South Cowichan Fire Protection Services study, and they identified that area was a potential for a fire hall location, so we adopted CGI just as a moniker to identify that area. Essentially, it's just to the west of the intersection with Shawnigan Lake Road and the highway. So this particular area, we looked at the various sites that were brought up to us by the different parties and stakeholders as potential areas where a fire hall might be located or could be located. And after doing the analysis of all those different locations, we identified that this was probably the optimal location for a fire hall, for a main fire hall to exist. And the reason for that is if you look at those little polygons I was talking about earlier, you'll see that the 5-kilometer polygons are go a little bit further and actually go well out of the area now for the current fire service area, and extend slightly further down into this area, which is mostly residential, and it provides further coverage down into the CRD service area. And the 8-kilometer polygons still cover off the full area, go well into Shawnigan, and they go well down just past the southernmost point on Highway 1. And what they also do is take the 8 kilometers down into the CRD portion here below the border. So now your coverage into here, which includes the Elkington, which was referred to over in this area right here. So these areas here would be covered within the 8 kilometers and get the benefit of the better insurance coverage. So one of the things about looking at this, as I mentioned, how you have opportunities to consider. So considering different needs with relation to a need of a satellite fire hall, we looked at it to say, is there a need for a hall? Is there a better location for a new main fire hall that would negate the need for an additional satellite hall? Or is there a 2-hall option, which would be a main hall with a satellite hall? So we considered all those different things in the process. With the condition of the existing fire hall and its need for a subsequent replacement at some point, and the lack of suitability of the location it's currently situated at, where it's on a single access road, which is dead-ended, which means that if something happens to that road, you lose access to your fire department. So we always try and locate fire halls where they have more than one access point. So those opportunities to look at whether or not a new fire hall to replace the existing one and place it in the proper location would negate the need for a second fire hall and the cost associated, and negate the need to upgrade and replace the hall in its existing spot. And then we also looked at the opportunity to say, is there another location you could put a main hall and keep the Malahat current hall as a satellite for the time being to meet your requirements for fire underwriters. So we looked at all these different things, and the other thing that came into this mix was the Ministry of Transportation and Highways plan, which was regards to cutting off access, or not cutting it off so much as changing the access, if you will. So what their plan would be, and it's the map of it's in the report as an appendix. What that would do is it would eliminate left turns off of the highway onto Shawnigan Lake Road and onto Whitaker Road, which is where the fire hall is located. It would create a new road system, if you will, which would still allow for northbound access, but you have to go south to get to it. So without diving into a lot of the details on it, we had to take into consideration that if that plan were to go ahead, essentially as they've outlined it, then how does that look in terms of what we're proposing for location of a fire hall? So those things all taken into account did lead us to the conclusion that that the CGI location, Shawnigan Lake Road area, if you will, would be an optimal one. It would not be impacted by the changes that are proposed by MOTI if in fact that goes ahead. So some of the key findings that we had, the department has good leadership. There's no concerns there. The firefighters themselves are very dedicated. They're dealing with the recruitment challenges, which I mentioned, and some of those things are related to what we heard from the firefighters: housing availability, the demographics, work opportunities. A lot of them are working well out of the area, so they won't be here during the daytimes a lot of times. And there's firefighters, which is increasingly the case, that don't even live within the fire catchment area. They live outside of it, but they are part of the department and responding to calls within the area. And that's getting to be more common in areas where people don't work and live in the same community. So that was sort of one of the key starting points. And then we also noted, as I mentioned earlier, that Mill Bay is looking at a number 3 fire hall in the Bamberton area. They've got a site identified. I viewed that with the fire chief, and I've talked to him about the progress they're making, and they're doing it in partnership and collaboration with the Malahat First Nation. So that we were looking at in terms of how that would impact what Malahat Fire Department needs to consider in its planning. And that part of it is all positive. If they get that new fire hall put in at some point, it is a benefit to the Malahat Fire Department. If it doesn't go in, what we're talking about and proposing still works. It doesn't create any gaps, but it's not counting on the Mill Bay Hall, in other words. The MOTI plan that I mentioned, just to give a context to it, the indication that we've had, it's somewhere between 3 to 5 years in a time frame. It still requires approval and funding before that would move forward. So it's my understanding it's a conceptual proposal. They've got drawings and everything laid out, but it's got a lot further to go before it would become reality. So short term, it's not an immediate impact, but from a long-term planning perspective, it needs to be considered. The proposed service area expansion that I showed you in that map with where the new area covered by the gold, that presents an opportunity now that you're going to be expanding that, and the area down there is going to require the coverage. So it's a chance to look at what I mentioned about the single fire hall in a new location as an option versus just building a new hall and then having a satellite hall as well. The existing hall not being adequate for its needs, and I glossed over it really quickly, but it sits on a very small footprint. It's got no room for expansion. They don't have adequate sites for on-site training. They don't have a water supply for on-site training. So there's numerous reasons why they're facing challenges, and they're doing their best to meet all their requirements with it, but it's certainly not somewhere you would look at as an optimal location for the future. So one of the other things too is that we identified that a longer term plan is needed for their apparatus replacement as well as the fire hall. As we mentioned, the FUS indication or fire underwriters insurance ratings, those things require part of this being the overall planning, and the apparatus goes hand in hand with that. When the underwriters, they don't just look at fire halls and locations, they look at what apparatus you have, is it suitable, and the capabilities and capacities of it. So those things need to be planned for. So we were looking at those things as recommendations as well. And based on the mapping analysis, as I mentioned, there was basically 2 options that came to pass. One was locating a new main fire hall in the CGI, general location of the CGI site, and then that eliminates the need once it's operational for the existing Malahat Fire Department location. We would no longer require that to be there. It would now have full coverage of the whole area, including the new area. The other option was looking at a site which we identified down on Stebbings Road, near where the park is on Stebbings Road, general vicinity, not any one particular lot, and said that if you're looking at an alternative where you wanted 2 halls, that would make sense to build a new fire hall there and keep the existing Whitaker Road one as the satellite hall. And when I mentioned before about Mill Bay number 3, when that came online, that would certainly allow you to get rid of the Whitaker Road haul for sure. Over time, you could still get rid of Whitaker Road without Mill Bay. It just impacts a little bit on the distances you cover in your 5 kilometers and 8 kilometer coverage in that northeast sector. So I won't dive down that rabbit hole too far. Needless to say, the recommendation we came up with was that CGI as a single haul model was the one that made the most sense strategically, operationally, administratively. Probably from a financial perspective, it would make a lot of sense as well, but we didn't dive into an analysis of that piece of it. A few key recommendations just to cover off. There's a lot of recommendations in the report itself. These are just a few of them we thought we would just highlight. One was that the regional district keep abreast of what's happening with the Fire Safety Act. The minister has indicated that he is going to make some changes to the act as it's been passed. Currently, the act was passed. It's had royal assent. It's waiting an order in council to become come into force, if you will. So that's something you need to be aware of to make sure that you're fully aware of what's coming down the pipe that are related to the statute, because there's a number of different areas that are going to be impacted for the RD under that act. So one of the things that it does is it requires the CVRD as a regional district will be required to do things like, if it's amended, it'll be required to do fire inspections of properties throughout the regional district, not just in areas with fire departments. It'll be required to do fire inspections throughout the regional district, and it'll make changes for the fire chief's powers and local government powers that'll need to be reflected in the CVRD's bylaws. One of the other recommendations, number 16, you saw there, which was to develop an asset management plan. So the rationale behind this one being important is because there is no current financial or scheduled planning replacement of all the apparatus. So right now, they're getting to a point where one of their key apparatus is coming up and it'll time out as far as the underwriters in terms of what they rate it as, and it'll affect insurance. So some planning will need to take place for that. Number 24 here talks about the apparatus replacement plan, goes hand in hand with the last one in terms of what the requirements are that need to be addressed. The first one, the one before that, I omitted to say, talk about the asset management, looking at the fire hall, which is part of this big picture I was talking about. 24 is focused mainly on the apparatus themselves and how you're going to replace it, how you're going to do the financial piece behind it, and make sure you can do it in a timely way to meet your insurance needs. And then the last one was from the main recommendation, which was to acquire a appropriate lot somewhere near that CGI location, taking into account all the things that we've talked about in the presentation here, MOTI, distances, all those different things. A few of the pending changes, as I mentioned, the Fire Services Act, when it comes in, it's expected 2023. It's been put off a number of different times in terms of it being enacted into force. But once it does come in, and the indications we are getting now was that sometime in 2023, don't know exactly when. But once it does come in, if they do the changes that they're talking about for the inspection system, there's going to be impacts on the regional district, and this will be all regional districts, but they'd be required to appoint the fire inspectors to conduct inspections. They'll have to do risk assessments of properties. They'll have to figure out a frequency of inspection based on that risk. And there'll also be an ability for regional district to institute a fee system separate and apart from your normal practices, so it'll be built into the legislation. So those are things that would be impacts for the regional district. It also brings in an administrative penalty enforcement system, so basically it'll replace when people don't comply with orders to correct things under the Fire Act. Basically, they're putting in a new system in place that allow the penalization of people when they've just absolutely refused to do anything, that they can force them to do it and be compliant with it. The good news is that will be handled mostly by the Office of the Fire Commissioner. So in other words, the local government level, the fire inspector doing things, writes an order. If he doesn't get compliance, then they can refer it and it'll be prosecuted, if you will, or enforced through the Office of the Fire Commissioner. So it's good for the regional districts in that they don't have any additional workload attached to that. Fire investigations, however, as I mentioned, they'll be required to do investigations, so they have to have investigators appointed. And there's fire reports that are already part of the requirement, partially in the current system, that have to be undertaken as well whenever there's a fire. So the primary impact for the regional districts is going to be really around finding a way to address the fire inspection system requirements that I spoke of, the investigation ones, and also updating of all your different bylaws that are impacted by the changes in the statute. And at the fire department level, they'll need to address the operational guidelines that will also change as a result of many of these things. And then the last 2 points, the fire training standard, the Office of Fire Commissioner did an update in September of this year, actually, 2022. There was some changes to that, and that's going to require the fire department to have a bit of a review to make sure that it's still meeting all the new changes that they put in. But also importantly, WorkSafe BC has aligned its requirements and regulations now to take into account the new fire training standard, which means that WorkSafe will be enforcing violations of it through their statute as well. So that's a major change that really didn't exist before. So those are just some of those things. And related to that last point, the occupational health and safety, some people be aware, but there's some 16 different presumptive cancers. In other words, cancers that the government has recognized as being workplace related for firefighters. So if a firefighter comes down with one of the presumptive cancers, it's automatically work related and it's a WorkSafe claim. As that goes into it, WorkSafe has a lot of different requirements that have to be met from a health and safety perspective, not the least of which is decontamination. It's become a very big issue. Fire halls have to be able to decontaminate equipment before it comes back and contaminates the fire hall. Exhaust separation, which Malahat doesn't have. In other words, when the trucks start up, the exhaust goes through the whole building. So those kinds of issues already exist, but they're being even more stringently enforced in the future in terms of how you decontaminate all the turnout gear from a fire before you even get back on the truck, let alone in the hall. So these are all interconnected pieces that come into play. And with that, I just wanted to say that I wanted to thank the CVRD because undertaking these kinds of reviews, they're really an industry best practice, and I think we've learned a lot about Malahat's capabilities and challenges and so on, and I think the information that we're able to pass on to the CVRD will hopefully be helpful in its planning, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. This is a big topic. Questions, anyone? Director Abbott.
Through the chair, thank you for a great presentation. A couple of weeks ago, we had a tour of the South End, and some of us got to see the challenges that the staff are having to work with. On the maps where you had the proposed leave it or put CIG somewhere else, you see a little road going down into Goldstream Heights.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, this may be beyond the scope of what you can comment on, but hopefully there aren't going to be more houses built on that spine going down towards Goldstream.
I don't have a lot of knowledge on the scope and scale of the development. We were made aware of some of the parameters. We've seen the agreement that was originally brought forward with the developer in terms of the number of different types of properties they have, but they have the ability, I think they're 25 acre minimums, but I believe they can go down to 5 acres if they're subdivided. So there's houses being built all the way down to the very bottom of Goldstream Heights because we went through and mapped that whole area. So sporadically you'll see places being built already, but it's not consistently and not every property.
So what I sense is that we're going to be beyond that 8-kilometer range very soon.
Currently with the Malahat Whitaker Road Hall, it doesn't quite reach your boundary right now. And if you went with the CGI recommended site, it would not only reach everything within the CVRD, it would reach further down into the CRD area, which is not an area you provide fire protection to at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if I may, supplemental about the highways, MOTI's plan to close the highway. Can you just expand a little further? Is that going to impact the turning out onto the Trans-Canada going north?
Yes, it would. So essentially, to describe it very quickly, they proposed closing off, I guess would be northbound access to turn onto Whitaker Road would be no longer required. Southbound would still be able to access, but northbound would not. And the same thing for Shawnigan Lake Road. If you're coming north, you wouldn't be able to turn on Shawnigan Lake Road. You would have to do an alternate route, which they've laid out what that looks like. If you're responding from Whitaker Road, they're going to put a new Whitaker Road in to intersect further to the west with Shawnigan. So you'd have to drive down to there, further to the south, and then get onto the northbound access and then go up. So it does increase your access time, if you will, to the northeast quadrant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I go to Director Wilson, could you please tell me what CGI stands for?
I don't know the definition of CGI itself, but it was the name of the company at the time that was doing the report, and it was,
Okay, I just got,
yeah, it was the name of the company itself that provided the original report, and we just used that as a shorthand, if you
oh,
will,
okay.
to identify the location.
I missed that, thank you. Director Wilson? Yes, Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks for that. That was good stuff. And the firefighters, first responders, they deal with all sorts of things, and I have the highest regard for any of the work that they do there. The interesting thing is this Fire Safety Act, where the major changes, and you did, I think, summarize some of those there. But this is one of the things that came up there was the fire inspectors and the fire inspections.
Yes.
So it would be the responsibility of the regional district to employ those fire inspectors and train them?
Yes, the current iteration of the act that was passed retained the existing, where the only fire inspections are done in municipalities. Anything outside a municipality, there's no requirement for fire inspections in the province. So when the act was passed, it was still crafted in that way. The government made a decision to say that they were going to do an amendment to the act before it came in that would say that the regional districts would be included along with municipalities as having the requirement to do these inspections as well. And that's been one of the things that's delayed its implementation, was they were looking at how that would occur. And they've had a lot of discussions at UBCM and through all the different entities in the regional districts themselves on that very question of that. But yes, the regional districts, if it goes down that path, would have to address fire inspections within the regional district.
Okay, and with that, and if you don't mind a follow-up here, as far as those inspections are concerned, who initiates that? Who says, go and have a look at that place? Is it because something has happened or because there's been a complaint?
So it's a bit of a broad topic, but if you look at municipalities which have a requirement now, for example, the law requires them to have a regular system of inspection, which is not defined. So each municipality would define what that looks like. And typically they do it, it's for commercial properties. We're not talking residential inspections.
Okay, yeah.
But they would determine how frequently they do the inspection and what actions they take as a result of what they find. And it's governed by the Fire Services Act, the current legislation, their powers and everything else. So the modernization of the act will include a lot of different changes. But it's really defined by the local government in terms of them determining what needs to be inspected according to what the act says, and then how frequently it needs to be done is all that risk-based approach, which is a new piece.
Okay, so it's, and I'm sorry to go on about this, but it's interesting because it's mainly biased towards the commercial side?
It's for a commercial, like in other words, you're looking at businesses, commercial, industrial, those are the kind of things that are inspectable properties. Residences aren't.
Okay.
If it was a condo building, it would be, the common areas are respected, but not
Yeah.
the suites, that sort of thing.
Good, okay, thank you very much.
Director Acton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions. This one might be for staff. Early on, 5 years ago, when I got elected the first time, I was sat down about the Goldstream Heights area, people not having fire service, and CVRD was going to do a process. It's almost like an AAP or something. And then recently, that wasn't done, or maybe about a year ago, still wasn't done. So my question is, has that been done? And those residents are now part of the fire service?
I would perhaps defer to staff on the process part.
Thanks. Rob Schooler, Fire Services Coordinator with the CVRD. Goldstream Heights is a bit of a special area. There's lots of gaps in fire protection. This gets back to the fire protection inclusion petition process. The staff are currently undertaking a mass petition process. The first attempt was not successful. We didn't get 50 plus 1% buy-in, if you will. So we're going back to the trough again and retrying to try and get as many of those properties included as possible. But Goldstream Heights is a bit of an enigma at this point. We're trying, but it's a tough one.
Okay. Well,
If you
okay.
don't have fire protection.
Well, maybe I can help you. Maybe we can work together, maybe with the community, and try and get that message out. That it's
I welcome
important
your
for them.
assistance,
Okay.
yes, but-
I'm happy to try and help. Then and so I hear that it's a priority, getting that done.
Fire
right?
protection, yeah.
Yes, for them. Okay, that's great.
And it's not just in Goldstream Heights, it's elsewhere in the region as well.
Right, but this has been on the radar for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And my second question is, well, one is, this proposed area, CGI, is like, it's very close to the Shawnigan Lake's main fire hall, so is there a bit of a doubling up there? And are you also considering, because that Shawnigan Fire Hall is actually it's an improvement district, so have you connected with them and taken all that into consideration?
So with regards to Malahat and its fire service area and its responses, you're often have these cases where you have adjoining fire service areas, fire departments, even different regional districts. What you're looking at in terms of the Malahat one is the area that it provides fire protection for. That's what you're planning in terms of delivery. There are times when you may situate something like we're suggesting here, where this is an ideal location for the CVRD for that particular fire service area that it has to protect. It may in fact be somewhat close to another fire hall in a different area, but those fire halls typically only respond if they're on a mutual aid, and when requested, they'll respond as a second response. If you have automatic aid, you can build in protocols to say they'll respond at the same time. But it's not a case, unless you have a consolidated approach, in other words, a fire service area that encompasses an entire area of multiple departments, you have an opportunity then to maybe look at where you're relocating fire halls and so on to optimize it, but you're still trying to look at it to say, where is it we have to protect and where do we need those halls located to, and it's related to the road system. So geographically, they can be relatively close, but when you're looking at this particular one, we're considering all parts of the fire protection area, like right down to the southern border, to the northeastern, and then to the Shawnigan border. So it's beneficial that there's another hall relatively close from a mutual aid perspective, but it doesn't negate the needs that the Malahat department has in terms of what it has to respond to in its own area. I'm not sure if that totally answered your question.
Was that a yes or a no? Did you consider them?
No, we didn't consult with the Shawnigan Lake Department. We're aware of the fire halls and their locations, but it didn't really impact what we were considering for the Malahat department. In other words, saying there's a fire hall here would not change what the needs are for the Malahat department. It's a benefit that it's closer, but it doesn't change what they have to meet within their own area. They're two different fire departments, and as you say, legally two different entities too.
I guess, and so my last question, so not really coordinated with them, but
No, we
it
didn't
sounds like
consult with them,
bit
no.
of crossing over that's
Yeah.
unnecessary, because like the ambulance station is there. So let's say the ambulance station was on fire, would Shawnigan Lake show up? Is that theirs? It's in Mill Bay, it's right there.
So,
But it's just hypothetical.
Yeah,
Never
but-
mind. So I wanted to bring up Elkington, but before that, the spot, am I echoing? The location that you mentioned, are you aware that there's a piece of land that was donated through development, I think it's Mill Bay, and it's been held for the RCMP detachment that has never happened? So perhaps there's land already, maybe somebody could help me out here. This is before my time. This is right across from from Kelsey. Yeah, so isn't that where you're,
If I understand, you're talking in Mill Bay area?
yes.
So
Wasn't
that wouldn't do
one of the
anything.
spots? No. Oh, okay. I thought that was one of the spots you mentioned. So then my next question is, with Elkington Forest, was before my time, but when I did become aware of it, didn't take much to realize that the whole thing was a bad idea. And so obviously there's been a bad deal that was made, and we haven't gotten our amenities. So I guess wondering, will there be some kind of contribution from Elkington Forest to contribute to this?
We are aware of the agreement, the amenities agreement and so on with the development and where the triggers were and everything else. But we're not part of the process of evaluating how to meet the requirements of those amenities, so I'd have to defer to staff on where that element of it is at, but we're fully aware of the landscape, if you will, of the development, how it evolved, and where the amenities piece comes into it. And the Elkington Forest one has one access, and you have to actually go into the CRD to get back into to the CVRD to get to it. And that was where I was pointing out on the map originally, but I'm not sure if Clayton or Rob would like to address the amenities side of it, or?
Yes, at this point in time, we don't have any information on it, but the staff will be coming back with a report relating to that, and a lot of the information that comes as part of this report is part of that conversation. So we will be bringing that back very shortly to the committee.
You okay? Director Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you to our delegation. So I'm going to pose a couple of crystal ball gazing questions, I think. You touched on something right at the beginning, and obviously there's folks much smarter than me turning their attention to the issue of the recruitment deficit that we have. There's some departments are in pretty good shape, but there's a different mindset amongst, I guess our target audience. We want to have, folks that are, potentially family members or families and living in our communities. And I think there's been some changes to the Income Tax Act and the likes that have first penalized and then sort of, I think they've made some changes to make it a little better. But my question is there anything that you see on the horizon that is going to assist in making attractiveness in this role, in this volunteer capacity, something that's going to, bring that sense of community back to people where they can go and they can serve in their communities? This is mainly a rural issue with volunteer departments. Have you seen anything that gives you any hope that there may be some changes in that front? And I have another question after.
I would say based on what I've seen here, but also my own experience, I was with two different volunteer departments over some 13 years as a volunteer myself before I was in the career service. And I don't think there's a lack of willingness or interest at the community level to participate in it. It's the other challenges that are the lack of ability to work and live in your same community because the work opportunities don't exist or there are not enough of them for those that are willing and wanting to volunteer. That's one that's typical in most communities, even urban, semi-urban and rural ones, but suburban ones as well. So I don't think there's a lack of willingness. I think it's a caramel secret if you can figure out what's going to bring more volunteers in. Nobody's landed on a perfect one. They've done, as you alluded to, there's a tax incentive for volunteer firefighters. There's lobbying in Ottawa at the moment to try and increase the amount of that, to try and incentivize that same very thing. But there is no one solution to it. But your demographics, where the people live, the age of the demographics. I mean, firefighting is not a young woman's game anymore. You require some level of youth, fitness, and that. Not to say that you can't, but there's limitations on that. So people who have ability, time, maybe even interest, but the physical attributes of it are not appealing or not feasible, if you will. So all those demographic pieces come into it too. So the age of your population, where they live, the interest level, the commitments. Volunteer commitments now, people are finding very difficult to balance work and family and then throw volunteer firefighting into it. There's a lot of time commitment required for training and all the other pieces and the operational response. So long answer to say that no, there's no magic solution at this stage, but it's not a lack of willingness.
Fair enough. And second question, and this might involve a little crystal ball gazing as well, is clearly these are huge costs for apparatus. And we know that smaller departments are really having a lot of difficulty. And this is compounded by the fact that our facility is needing to be replaced, aging apparatus. And part of my role, I'm a UBCM electoral area rep, and there's a lot of interest coming from rural areas to, maybe see if we can get the underwriters to release their stranglehold on the regulations around equipment. We're finding that there are, good equipment with low miles, low hours on their pumps that could easily be certified for longer than the 25-year period, and it seems like there's just no movement by the underwriters on that front. Have you seen anything that would give some of the rural areas a little bit of hope that there may be some wiggle room on that front? Because, as I say, you've got something that is $500,000 new, if you're lucky, and worth a few $1,000s when it's, barely got any use on it. So any thoughts on that front?
That's an area that the whole fire service is struggling with, and not only here, but I mean, Fire Underwriters is a cross-Canada organization, and we deal with them on a regular basis for these kind of reviews and talking about their ratings and how they arrive on them. The whole apparatus replacement piece associated to theirs, it's an ongoing kind of concern, I guess, at this stage, is where we as a company, we're looking in and talking with the fire chiefs right now about how we might be able to talk with fire underwriters to see if there's anything that can be done. They've acknowledged that there's artificiality to all those limitations, the 15, the 20, the 25-year limits, regardless of whether the truck's still essentially new or not. So conversations are on the way, but there's nothing on the horizon yet that says they're going to change it. But I don't think the door is closed. It's a matter of talking with underwriters to see what can be worked out and see what they're willing to do.
And it's just to follow up, if there's any suggestions as to what the political pressure could be brought to bear, we'd be all ears, because this is something that's going to change, or we'll have departments closing, I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Director
Thank you,
Siegel.
Chair. Through the chair to our delegate. Thank you very much for the presentation. And I've been lucky to go through the report with Mr. Postings a few weeks ago, and I also visited the site on our training last month. So I was really struck by the occupational hazard, the workplace requirements that hall does not live up to. And so it's clear we need a new hall. But are there also recommendations for the short term? Because building a new hall is going to take a number of years. Is that part of your report, or is that will that roll out through staff in the future?
There are some recommendations in the report that address those issues, such as the exhaust separation. They're relatively high-level recommendations. There are a number of different things. And the question is going to be coming down to what can be done in the short term, and things would need to be done because they're health and safety related. In the longer term, you've got a lot of challenges that the site just won't let you address. So there's going to be that challenge there that, it's like short term, you may have some measures. Longer term, that's not a solution there unless you're trying to rebuild the entire thing on one site, which isn't feasible, obviously, because they have to keep operating and so on. So,
Okay.
There is some recommendations.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes, please, Director McClintock.
Through the chair to our delegate. Again, thanks for the report. Just want to echo those similar sentiments. Just having gone through the hall, just how completely inadequate it is. A fire hall that doesn't have access to water, it just strikes me as alarming. Taking care of our folks that live in our communities, these volunteers who are so vigilant on behalf of all of us, it's just, I can't think of a higher purpose for the sport. Just curious, what are next steps? I haven't spoken to all the board members, but I get the sense we're in support of moving forward. What are next steps? How can you guys be supported?
So I would defer to staff, but normally the next steps we see is when a report like this is received, staff then takes it, they look at it, they look at the recommendations and decide what sort of priorities and come up with an action plan as to what they're going to address. And I believe that's what Rob was saying, but I'll defer to Rob to add to that.
Yeah, to your point, Director, exactly. Next steps will be we will take the report under advisement, make some recommendations, come back to the board for direction, and hopefully act on it.
Great. I think that's it. Oh, where's my? Let me just make sure. Director Martin, are you okay? All right, thank you so much, Mr. Anderson,
Thank
for
you.
coming. All right, let's take a break. 10 minutes, quarter after. Smile, everyone. Thank you. Sorry, yeah, I forgot to do that. Welcome back. So we are moving on to correspondence. Madam Corporate Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First item, item C1, correspondence from the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities regarding the 2023 AVICC call for nominations and resolutions, and this was referred from the November 23rd board meeting, and this is for direction.
Thank you. I thought it would be a good idea if Director Morrison, who is very involved in, and has been very involved in AVICC and now UBCM, could give us a quick 2-minute overview of why we care about these organizations.
I'll do it in 90 seconds. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities, first off, is a society. It is not a local government. It operates under the Societies Act, and I think all local governments in the area, which includes Sunshine Coast, are members, including a number of First Nations. And it's a really great advocacy body that does a few things. But I can share with you the big priority is the convention in April. And the convention in April is a lot of effort goes into that, not only just in the choice of the keynote speaker and the likes, but arranging to have, senior government officials and the likes attend, and the opportunity to do education and training in areas that are of keen interest to our members and the members, which are local governments. That work is just underway now. I can tell you that it's actually moving with the times and the likes, and the marching orders for the organization. Now, I'm past president, so I was president until April. We had brought forward for our members an idea on advocacy and what the role of advocacy would be for our area association. And it was essentially decided through a report that came to the convention in April that UBCM is really the advocacy body for local governments. And we can do great work by feeding into UBCM the concerns of our area association. And so it was decided by the membership at the convention that we needed to be proactive, but feed into that system and make sure that issues that are of concern, and that's the next item on the agenda, which is resolutions, are brought forward. UBCM vets and goes through most of the all of the resolutions for consideration and debate at our area association. But I can say that the plan was for 2022 was to begin an online education series that people could sign up for and join in on. And as it turned out, there was a change in the executive director. UBCM brought their executive director, Liz Cookson, back within their fold, and AVICC had to go out and find a new executive coordinator for the organization. She's just recently been hired away from North Cowichan, and I think we got a great person there. Just to finish off on so this is a great organization, and I would strongly encourage, if there's anybody around this table that's interested in learning more about the issues of our region, and it's quite varied from, anchorages that we have issues with here to, it covers the gambit. You could run for office, run for one of the members of the executive. They've got not only a specific electoral area rep, much like UBCM does, and I serve in that role, but they also have directors at large, and it's a great place to learn more about the interests of all of our area. The call for nominations is before us, and you simply need two elected officials to sign your nomination paper. It doesn't require a resolution of the board. So that's quick for you, and any questions? I would say you've got a half a dozen meetings a year, which you need to prepare for. There's agenda items are sent out in advance. They're just transitioning back into, I believe we have one of our first in-person meetings in a couple of years is happening next Friday, but most of them will be online Zoom meetings, and I think the time commitment involved is well worth the effort. The elections happen at convention every year, yes. Yep.
I can see lips moving, but I can't hear anything.
Sorry, Ben. I was just saying that I had the opportunity to be on the climate change leadership committee for Vancouver Island and coastal communities, which was an initiative that was done outside of AVICC. But what is really interesting is we all have the same issues in our area, but regionally we have very regionally specific issues related to climate change, for example. And it is really valuable to get to know people in the other regions and municipalities, and it's really good to look for opportunities to work together, because a lot of it is around advocacy and like building connections so that you have a stronger voice and a stronger ability to achieve things. So with that, that's the nominations front. So we deal with the nominations outside of this meeting, right? But the call for resolutions, does anyone have any ideas for resolutions? We haven't done our strategic planning, of course, but maybe you have an idea, Director Atton.
Well, I think Director Morrison's probably going to say this has been done before, but I think as electoral areas, we would all agree that our biggest issue is our roads, and I think we need more advocacy, and we need to start over and need some strong feelings going forward to MOTI and saying it's not good enough anymore. We do not want to hear anymore. Too bad, so sad. You're a rural highway, and we need different rules for mostly speed control in rural areas, and it's just simply not good enough anymore. So I think I don't know, as an electoral area, I would really, I would go to convention, speak to it, and ask for support from other electoral areas and from the municipalities. Just not okay anymore. And they have to be the most archaic ministry. They win that award, in my opinion.
Thank you. Anyone else have comments about roads? Would you like to support a resolution around roads? Director Morrison?
Yeah, a suggestion might be that we ask staff to perhaps bring in someone maybe at the level of a Mike Pearson and be a delegation here so that we can pose some of the questions that we have and the issues. And that may actually help us to frame what some of the issues are. I know that, Director Acton has been around here long enough to know that AVICC has looked at issues around, an ad hoc committee on snow clearing, for instance, and making sure those issues are dealt with. But I think that perhaps having MOTI come before us and I would suggest early in the new year if it could be arranged, and then we would still have time to be able to put forward a resolution that had some specificity to rural areas. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Anyone else comment? Director McClintock?
I just want to support that notion. I just totally agree that the way that Modi is handling things. Just went through my first storm, side streets not getting plowed. I know that's a little separate. It's handled by contractors, but yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done with rural roads.
Mr. Boyson, help us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just putting myself on the screen here. So I'd just like to, not that we had planned for this discussion, but Mr. Elf and myself, we'd already been in contact with Mr. Pearson from MOTI, and we are setting up a time for him to come and present. He does want to get back to doing regular presentations to the board, I think like was done prior to the pandemic. So I can look up the time and find out for everybody today when that's going to be, but I think we were working towards a time in later January, if I recall correctly. Thank you.
So that would be great if we could get it before the deadline, which is February, beginning of February, I think. Director Acton?
I guess, well, I don't know if there's going to be any more ideas for resolutions, but would that topic get put back on the agenda then in January? Maybe
Through the chair, so I
so that we
think,
could craft a resolution, or what would be the best step?
yeah, and I think, so we could be prepared for that at the same time after when that conversation's going on. And I'd also like to offer, I think what we could do is, it's always very helpful to go and look at all the previous motions and resolutions that's gone through, all the decisions from the province that have been passed before, all with varying results and not always well received, but it's good to summarize all that information beforehand as well. So we can look and have that information ready around this, when the presentation comes from the ministry, we can be ready to have that conversation the same day.
Thank you. I mean, my personal feeling is that they run a one-size-fits-all for the whole province, rural areas, and we are not, we don't really fit the old-fashioned rural definition in many of our areas, so it doesn't work anymore. And so, yeah. Okay.
I'm
so
Chair.
that's-
Sorry, Chair.
Oh, sorry. Director Martman, sorry, I didn't even see your yellow hand.
It's okay. I'll keep trying. Could staff remind me who Mr. Pearson is? Thank you.
District Manager. Through the chair, Mike Pearson is District Manager for Ministry of Transportation for Vancouver Island.
Yep.
So it would encompass not only the south, but
Yep.
the mid-island?
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah,
He's out of
absolutely.
Nanaimo, I believe.
Yep.
Any other ideas for resolutions?
My hand's still up, yes.
Yes, because I remember you and I talked about one. Go ahead.
Yeah, this stems out of, I think, of a lot of what we would all see as offensive behavior towards public officials. And I'm wondering if the AVICC has ever addressed the protection of elected officials in a resolution to that regard.
We could look into it. I think we need to bring, well, maybe Director Morrison can answer.
There's a module available, I believe, on the UBCM website that has been developed over the last couple of years that is addressing not only code of conduct, but some of the other issues around protection of elected officials. So I would suggest we go there first, and then that might be a good topic for discussion in January when we consider resolutions.
Okay. So can we leave it at that and people can just do their thinking over the Christmas holidays? And maybe in January come forward with any other ideas? Right, next agenda item.
Thank
We
you,
need to
Madam.
boogie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next item is information. Item IN1, there's two information items. The first one is Electoral Area D Couch Bay Advisory Planning Commission minutes of November 17th, 2022. And the second one is Electoral Area E Couch Station Satlam Glenora Advisory Planning Commission minutes of November 22nd, 2022. And those items are for information.
Thank you. Any comments? I have one comment. Lynn Jones was actually at the meeting for Area E, and she was missed on the list. Any comments? Questions? Nope. Next item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next item is reports. Item R1 is a report from the Planning Strategic Initiatives Division regarding the local area plan sequencing strategy dialogue, and there is a recommendation before you. Would you like me to read it?
I think Coralie would like to do a little presentation first.
Okay, thank you and good afternoon. I just have a couple of slides today which are reiterating two of the figures that were in the sequencing strategy report. Yeah. So the first one that I just wanted to present again to you and add a few comments, which is in my staff report and in the sequencing report, are the shared boundaries and geographic proximity, the sequencing of grouping A, B, and C together, D, E, F, and I together, and G and H together. So there's many different configurations of this. It was explained to you the rationale, the methodology in terms of what was recommended today. Certainly, if the timeline for this, which currently is proposed to span 3 years, was reduced, then we would probably still work geographically with those groups together, but we could work over a period of time of 2023 to 2024, and that may make your deliberations or have some other considerations for you as you deliberate the sequencing of it. So that's a variable that could be amended. What a lot of you have contacted me since I've sent out the draft geographic areas. We've already made amendments, so thank you very much, and I encourage everyone to continue to really take your microscope and look at those and get back to us with recommended changes. One suggestion for you today as well is to possibly consider proceeding with step 1 for all areas for 2023, to consider resourcing that through budget meetings. And we could come back to you after strategic planning with, depending on the overall strategic planning for the CVRD, with a recommended approach to proceed after 2023. That way, all electoral area, the plans are not bound by the electoral area boundary, but the actual plan boundary could begin and commence right away. And also maybe even some additional time, because pretty quickly when we get into communities, we are going to hear from communities which areas will need more work, which areas will need less work. As was stated earlier, we do know there's 3 charrettes already that have happened in 3 of the identified areas. So we've got some foundational work that's already begun. So In summary, we could proceed as recommended in the staff report and recommended in the sequencing strategy, which would be to look at doing them as presented in these groupings and as presented in this timing framework. And alternatively, I just suggest to you that one consideration is to proceed for 2023 on stage one, which is the shared visioning, and based on budget as an alternative. Happy to take questions, comments.
Thank you. Questions? Comments? Director Martin.
Thank you for those for those thoughts, Ms. Breen, because the align was, I guess, some of the concerns I'm thinking about with my community, and particularly I think because we have an OCP our OCP has been 25 years old, or back into 90s, and so I see the opportunities perhaps of a shorter timeline based on what you're saying. And I guess the other piece that is out there in my community is around the aquifer, protection of the aquifer. How does the development occur in that area because of our water concerns? I'm wondering if and the watershed, the concern for the watershed as well, which I think I'm just echoing for many different areas of the CVRD as well. So I guess I would be as supportive of what you're suggesting. Thank you.
Director Acton.
Yeah, some of the ideas you said were based on budget, and can you refresh our memory? Is any of the 400,000 grant covering this?
Unfortunately, there's no grant monies that are supporting the development of the local area plans. If we proceed in 2023, the requested supplemental is for 150,000 in 2023. No, then the additional supplemental request is for an additional 300,000 over 2024 and 2025.
Sorry, I'm thinking, did we not receive like a $400,000 grant, or was it $500,000 for some of the planning work, so that's covering?
The grant that was received was for the modernization only. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, then I'm going to jump in. So I think that's a good suggestion. Thank you, Ms. Breen. I think that some of these areas are going to be really challenging to do without a regional growth strategy. And so I think we need to really start thinking seriously about that issue. And so we should talk about that at strategic planning. I also think that some of the areas are going to be challenging because we really need to partner with First Nations and make sure that they, if we're going to do a good job, otherwise it's really money down the tube. And then my other issue is, of course, for Area E, I still don't see Coxsila watershed on the list of areas that need to be attended to, which worries me greatly, and I've heard no detail about how these other agricultural or forestry areas are going to be dealt with. So I can't really go back to Area E and say to my Cowichan Station and Glenora communities, well, you've just sort of fallen off the face of the earth. So I really need to have that sort of information dealt with. Request for information dealt with. But I'll leave it at that. So would anyone like to make a recommendation along what Corley suggested? That we move ahead with step one and staff bring back a report on sequencing after that. Director Morrison.
I could see the step one as Ms. Breen has outlined, but I want to throw another factor into this, and whether or not this plays any role in this. But one of the things that's become very clear is that, and this is about growth and plans for our communities, and I don't want to mix up the growth containment boundaries and the local area plans, but it seems like there's the backdrop of the affordable housing crisis that we have. and there's some areas are primed and ready to go. They've got the infrastructure in place. They're ready to go. And I think that certainty is what a lot of the development community is looking for. So is that a factor that needs to come into play in our discussions? If we do the first step and we go from an entire region approach, fair enough, but is that not a factor, the affordable housing crisis and the ability to be able to be positioned to deliver on new growth? Because quite frankly, if you got a community that doesn't have sewer or doesn't have water, and it's not in the foreseeable future, then why are we rushing to do a plan? Is my question. Any thoughts on that?
Thank you, through the chair. So I believe it's R5 or R6. Mr. Tippett will be presenting a report on a pilot project in Shawnigan along that line. Certainly in the MOCP and the Local Government Act does require us to include policies on affordable housing, and the MOCP is quite fulsome in that regard. The work over the last 2 years on the growth containment boundaries and redefining the residential designations, and really now we have 7 very clear residential designations, will help support that. So that's the foundation of the house. It's there. We're ready with that. In fact, with the OCP, which has 18 schedules, I would say 17 of them. Okay, I know I take Mr. Morrison's chuckling because of the length of the OCP, but in support of it, 3 of the schedules are text and the remaining are maps. So we're ready to probably go, I would say later this year, bringing that bylaw to first and second reading, getting it out on referral, with the exception of Schedule B. And Schedule B are the local area plans. The designations will be sitting in Schedule L and Schedule A. And so really the local area plans are, in this case, separate to what's in 4270. We'll be talking about heritage, the vision, the community feel, the development of those community centers. So it is not as necessary that it be adopted at an earlier stage. And that's why the 2025, from a planning perspective, makes sense. Probably more important is coming back to, as was earlier raised, is getting the regulations in place in the zones that support that affordable housing.
Comments, questions?
Move the
A motion?
strategy as outlined.
The strategy is outlined in the report, or Ms. Madam Corporate Secretary, do you have enough information about that?
No, Madam Chair. Is it the recommendation?
No, it's not. It's recommend that we move ahead with step 1 and staff bring back a report on sequencing after
Corporate strategic plan.
the corporate strategic plan in process.
That's what I
completed.
moved.
Okay, do I have a seconder? I have a seconder. Any more discussion? Mr. Martman, Director Martman. Okay, I don't see any hands, so all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion's carried. Thanks, Ms. Breen. R2.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R2 is a report from the Development Services Division regarding application number DVP 22D01 for 4461 Trans-Canada Highway, Couch and Bay Fire Hall. There is a recommendation before you. Would you like this read?
Yes, please.
Recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that application number DVP 22D01 for 4461 Trans-Canada Highway be issued.
Thank you. Do we have a planner that can speak to this? Oh, perfect. Would the applicant like to say, oh, well, let's turn to the planner first and then we'll turn to the applicant.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you, Emily.
Perfect. I have a quick presentation if that
Perfect.
would be the preference.
We
Perfect.
love staff presentations.
Well, good. I have just the thing. You just get this settled here. I'm working on 3 screens, so bear with me here. Okay, so thank you, Madam Chair. The application before you is a variance for the subject property located at 4461 Trans-Canada Highway off Wilmot Road in the Trans-Canada Highway frontage road. The property is zoned P3, which is a community institutional zone, and allows for civic use. These plans show the location of the existing site plan on the left and the proposed site plan on the right. The application requests 5 different variances to the Area D zoning bylaw. They include a decrease in the required agricultural setback from 15 meters to 8.6 meters for the siting of the proposed building, 0 meters for the installation of a drafting pit, and 3.5 meters for the installation of sanitary disposal tanks, all of which are identified here in orange on the right site plan. The request includes an increase to the allowable height from 10 meters to 12.7 meters to facilitate the proper storage of fire hoses. It should be noted that the staff report indicates 12.1 meters and not 12.7 meters. However, this is an error and the request to vary the height is from 10 to 12.7 meters. These renderings show what the building would look like from the south and west, traveling up island on the Trans-Canada Highway. A variance has been requested to the allowable impervious surface coverage from 45% to an increase of 66% of the total area of the lot to facilitate the new building, a paved training area for volunteers, as well as space to maneuver the vehicles. This image shows the proposed plantings on the site. As a way to manage the increased water runoff from the increase in impervious surface coverage, the applicants have proposed landscaping as well as the use of bioswales. Not seen on this image is the use of an asphalt water control curb adjacent to the neighbor, which is meant to direct water into the bioswales and keep it off the neighboring property. With that, staff is recommending before you that DVP 22D01 be issued as proposed.
Thank you. And the applicant is here?
The applicant is here, yes.
On Zoom or on WebEx?
On WebEx, yes.
Oh, Mr. Rupp, is that the person? Welcome, Mr. Rupp. Would you like to add anything? Are you there, Mr. Rupp? There he is. Welcome. Would you like to add anything?
I am here. Yes, hello. I am the applicant. I am here.
Welcome.
I am here mostly just to answer questions. No, I don't see the need to add anything. I think the report spoke for itself.
Great.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I am. That's perfect. Thank you. Any questions? Director Morrison has a question.
Oh, weird.
Thank you.
I am here.
I don't
I'm
know
here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry.
We can hear you. Can you hear us? Are you on mute? Well, I do have a question for the applicant. Can you hear us yet? You can hear us now. Perfect. We received correspondence from a neighbor which is supplemental to this property.
I am on mute because there is a very long delay.
He's watching it, he's streaming it. That's why.
Tell me when I can
Please,
speak.
please open your chat, Mr. Rupp, and we're sending you some information. You'll get it in a minute. Go ahead, Director Morrison.
Thank you. We received correspondence from a neighbor that was a little difficult to understand because he was sharing some concerns about the movement of water between his property and this property. And we just heard staff had indicated that there was some infrastructure being contemplated for dealing with the on-site hard surface runoff from the increased impervious areas. I just want to ensure that that the plans are appropriate and the bioswales have the capacity for this plan to not exacerbate existing problems that have been described by the neighbor, and to make sure that the bioswales and the stormwater runoff plans for this site are indeed adequate for its intended purpose.
Ms. Dixon, would you like to take that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can do my best. The applicant and I did speak earlier today about this correspondence that was received from the neighbor, just to confirm all efforts had been made, I suppose, for to direct stormwater, not so much directed, but I guess keep it on the property, which is what we always recommend or ask for our applicants. As we're all aware, we don't own the ministry's right of ways, so controlling stormwater into the pipes is more difficult in a regional district than it would be in a proper city. However, the applicants have, in my professional opinion, done what is necessary to this point to control what they can with the increase in impervious surface coverage by the increase in landscaping, but also with the bioswales and maintaining the water on site rather than off. This, again, is just the variance application, and there is a development permit that is part of this application as well, which has been delegated to the general manager, in which we will do our best to look at rainwater management on the site during that process, as well as part of the development permit guidelines do include the aquifer protection development permit guidelines.
Director Abbott?
I just have a question about the process. This correspondence that Director Morrison talks about, was that privy to all of us? Or?
Yeah, that was new business 2, and you would have got it by email, I think, yesterday. Or
Okay, I didn't. I apologize.
So I guess, does anyone else have anything? So that was my concern before or Director Martman's got a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I must say, express a concern that the applicant has, because I sit on a farm which floods, and I'm basically, require, the people downstream of me, and that's literally a wide swath of land, because water needs to flow down into the corresponding river, creeks and rivers and down to the ocean. And so when a farmer brings up an concern, I think the question it brings to my mind is this a current problem with that piece of property, not about the development, but the property itself, in terms of having water have to flow through around it to allow these farmers' fields to drain? And is that something you're aware of? And if not, what would be the next steps to at least not make the, as Director Morrison said, not make the situation worse for the current farmer conditions? And also, I think he speaks to exceptional loads of water that a 6-foot culvert can't handle. Thank you.
Ms. Dixon?
Emily, I'm here now too. I'm not sure if you want me to also say anything about that.
Sure. So I can take a stab at it first, and then we can go over to CJ. Through you, Madam Chair, it is possible. It is within the discretion of, or within the powers of the committee to I suppose, direct staff to request an engineer's report that ensures that the pre and post development flows equal out. That is something that we could do. It hasn't been done so far, but with the recommendations of the architects and the engineers that have been on the project so far, all we have requested and received from them is like I said, the landscape management plan and the that water retention curb. So if that is the wish of the committee, we can look to do that, but I might let CJ cover anything that I may have missed that might answer your question as well.
Not sure I'm able to answer that question in particular, but I did want to reiterate that the civil engineer has worked hard to understand the current condition and to ensure that everything we're doing improves on it and does not make anything worse than previous. So I think that's really where the department went through a long way to make sure that everything we're proposing is an improvement overall to both our site and thus also the neighboring sites.
Committee, any comments, questions? Director Abbott. The question is, would you like a more formal engineering review to deal with the water issue, or are you satisfied with the report as it stands?
I'd prefer to see a more formal engineering review.
Yeah. So would you like to make that motion?
I'd move that this be referred back to the proponent, to staff, to request that a more formal engineering report for
related to stormwater management.
Related to stormwater management.
Thank you.
Thanks for helping.
Do we have a seconder? We have a seconder. Director Wilson, did you want to talk to Director Wilson? No, you're good. Okay. Any discussion? Director Acton.
Thank you. Well, what I heard was that there was a civil engineer already involved and that there was improvement. So, you know, not to diminish this person's concerns, but, you know, one letter to take it all at 100% face value and then demand another engineering report sounds like a bit of overkill to me. So I think I just like clarity from staff. Is this, even though it's something we could ask for, do you think this is necessary, or do you feel comfortable with it as it is?
It's needed.
Through the chair to Director Acton, I can respond to that. We did send this letter as well to the applicants and have received confirmation from them this morning that despite this being somewhat of an abnormal situation to handle a neighbor's surface water drainage, that they confirm that they've made efforts to also handle that drainage on the fire hall property with the new stormwater infrastructure that will be built as part of this. And we do also have civil site servicing plans that provide some more detail on the drainage that unfortunately weren't included with this package, but we do have them that were submitted as well.
Is that a no? It's not necessary?
I believe it's not necessary to refer it back for more information at this point.
Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Can you tell me on what basis those calculations were made, considering that I think it was last year when we had an atmospheric river come through? Are they basing it on an average over the last 10 years of rainfall, or what are they basing their calculations on? Thank you.
That I would unfortunately have to refer to the actual civil engineer who was not able to be here today.
Yes, please.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I think Director Abbott is asking for more information on this. We need to know what the baseline was that these calculations were carried out on. I'm sure they were to the worst case scenario, but let's make sure. Thank you.
So we have a motion on the floor to refer this back to staff for more information on stormwater management from an engineer that can provide the calculations and so forth. Director Morrison?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, to staff. So I thought I heard Ms. Dixon indicate that the impervious surfaces and the likes were the subject of this variance, but that there was an additional permit that would be required, I think I'm just reading it now, on the aquifer protection and riparian protection. So is there a differentiation? Is there the potential for this application to proceed and the concerns around the stormwater management and on-site infiltration be addressed when the additional permit, which will ultimately be authorized by the general manager? Can the concerns that are being raised in committee today be addressed when the additional development permit is required? Could this variance permit proceed and the concerns be addressed at a later date?
Thank you through
Ms. Dixon.
through the chair. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay,
Carry
thank
on.
you. Thank you for the question. Yes, these are certainly conditions that could be set out in a development permit. They are probably more suited to a development permit anyway. Development variance applications are regulatory in nature. We, as of today, do not have any regulations specific to drainage on properties. Those are something that are suited better to development permit area guidelines and the development permits themselves. So yes.
So I'd like to make a couple of comments about this. If we approve this, I guess the point of it is the site coverage is going to be greatly increased, the impermeable site coverage. So there is less opportunity to deal with stormwater. And we know we're getting increasing stormwater problems and challenges. And this is an area where you're on basically a clay bench plateau, and drainage is a huge issue. And you'll notice when you drive down the highway, before you turn onto Coxila Road, there's a huge ditch that the highways has to manage the water. So it is a real issue in that area. So I am concerned when I get a report and there isn't any detail about the about how we're going to manage it apart from some rain gardens. And so I'm not feeling very comfortable that we have good information that it will be able to handle the kind of water that we'll see in the future when we have such a limited site to deal with it now. So, anyone have any more comments or questions?
Here in Netherland.
Oh, Ben, hi.
Yeah, hi. I just wonder if staff could help refresh my memory on the legal requirements of allowing water to continue to flow through properties, especially I'm thinking of adjoining farms in this particular case where one farmer says, you know, the water's coming in, I'm going to keep the water, and they're entitled to keep as much storm water as they want, but the next farmer down can't prevent the continual flow of the water without having a legal issue. I'm wondering if that's my understanding. Is there a legal concern here about any impeding of flow?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't think that I have quite the answer that you're looking for that question. It is an issue that we deal with often with our applications in the regional district. Being a regional district and not having drainage service areas, or many of them at least, or not serving that sort of purpose as we think drainage service area would intend, and having to rely heavily on private property owners to manage their own water on site. But I don't have the legal perspective to offer you, but I defer to one of the managers.
All right, back to the motion. Unless Ms. Chair has something to add.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So you have two options essentially. One is to proceed with the variance or to not proceed with the variance pending the receipt of further information. In making your decision, you should feel that you have as much information as you need to make that decision. So today, if you don't feel like you have complete information, you could certainly refer the application back to staff and we could bring back further information to the next committee meeting. This is also the committee at which you're making a recommendation to the board. So there's an opportunity to actually make the final decision at next week's board meeting. So depending on how you proceed, staff could also provide the additional information that was not included with the application today in advance of next week's board meeting. That may be able to allow you to make a more informed decision when you're asked at the board table. But in regards to the issue of how you deal with, drainage, obviously it's something that we would deal with at the development permit stage, but we wouldn't advance to that unless this group has approved a variance. And so if you feel like you need that information to be comfortable to make the decision on the variance, then do that. Once that decision's made, it'll direct the applicant in terms of whether or not they have to alter their plans or can proceed as planned. Hopefully that is clear. I will also not speak to the law on drainage because that is not my area of professional expertise. So we need to bring in a legal professional to do that for you.
Director Acton.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I'm going to, if this motion is, I guess it's on the table, I'm going to be voting against it. I think we trust our staff, that we've just heard many times that it's going to be part of the development permit. And the more kind of like we go down these little holes, our agenda gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So this is the part where we end up with like too much information and we don't know. So we're hearing that it's covered. And at least that's what I heard. And I don't need to know all the details, and I'll leave it up to the engineers. And I hope we can not have negative consequences to demanding more information.
Madam Corporate Secretary, could you read the motion, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recommendation before you is that the application number DVP 22D01 for 4461 Trans-Canada Highway be referred back to staff to request a formal engineering report related to stormwater management.
Thank you. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? I think we have 3 people opposed. Mr. Director Martman, who's opposed? Okay, that's carried. Moving on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next item is item R3, which is a report from the Utilities Division regarding Bald Mountain Wastewater Treatment Plant odor. And there is a recommendation before you. Would you like me to read it?
Yes, please.
Recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that short-term upgrades to the wastewater treatment plant odor control system be completed within the existing budget and a further odor assessment be completed.
Thank you. We have staff report, and I can't remember your last name.
Thompson.
Ms. Thompson.
Thank you. So yeah, this report is on the Bald Mountain Wastewater Treatment Plant in Area I. It's to present an odor assessment that was provided or completed by a consultant, Arcadis. Bald Mountain Wastewater Treatment Plant serves a community of Bald Mountain, which is at least in part a seasonal community. So that means that the treatment plant does see varied operational conditions in different seasons. Some residents in the community raised concerns about nuisance odors from the treatment plant, which initiated this report. So the consultant visited the site 3 times throughout the year to get a sample of what was happening at the treatment plant in different seasons throughout the year. The odors are intermittent, so they were trying to identify kind of the operating conditions that were causing the nuisance odors. The report makes a few recommendations about solutions to prevent or mitigate the odor problems. We kind of separated those into short-term lower cost solutions and longer-term higher cost solutions. Some of the short-term solutions we've already implemented or began to implement. And then we've provided just kind of a rough cost estimate of some of the longer-term solutions. In order to implement some of these higher cost long-term solutions, we'd likely need to go to the community for approval. So we're recommending further assessment of implementing short-term options and then further assessment of long-term options and refining those cost estimates. That's it.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Can I turn to the director of the area? Or Director Deck?
I'm sure everyone that had anything to do with the treatment plant, from the CBRD to the developers to the home buyers, felt confident that it was going to be as successful as it has been elsewhere, but for whatever reasons or conditions, it hasn't. I spoke with those most impacted by the odor as I went door to door during the electoral campaign, and I know they wouldn't characterize what they've been experiencing as nuisance odor, because it has severely affected their quality of life. For example, sending them indoors on summer evenings. There have been efforts to address this issue, and there will be additional strategies implemented, and I'm grateful to staff for that. And I would be in favor of quick fixes, short-term solutions, and any necessary remedies that will allow these people to enjoy their homes and the natural world that first drew them to the Cowichan Valley.
Would you like to move the recommendation?
Oh, I do.
Great. And do I have a seconder? Seconded. Any discussion?
Just looking at the report, hopefully I didn't miss it, just approximately how many people are affected? Or homes?
I think, I'm not sure of only the homes, I believe, in closest proximity to the plant are affected, so, and the lift station, so, we've had like a few complaints that we've received. I believe the service area is something like 120-ish homes, yeah.
Okay. It's like ballpark, maybe like 3, 4, 5 complaints, something like that, or more? Okay.
Yeah, just a few complaints that we've heard.
Okay. That's all.
We've heard lots of complaints over the years, but probably from a few people, from a few households. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and I understand as well that some residents may experience the same thing, but they know that there's some people kind of championing that already, so they might not come forward as well, so.
All right, anything else?
Madam Chair? Yeah.
Oh,
Here.
Director Martman,
Yeah.
please.
Thank you. And sorry, I didn't jump in there quick enough before we did the resolution or the motion, but I had a question, or because my observation on reading this report is that the detection levels that they measure are the bottom end of those detection levels are, you know, the smell or the odor or the nuisance that they say that's being there is actually 10% of the very minimal detection level. Is that correct? And am I reading that right? Because it seems to me you can detect you can send all the reports you want in, but if you can't measure as low as a person can smell, you're never going to understand the concerns or the complaints of the neighbors. Did I miss something there? Or maybe Mr. Etherington can weigh in.
Yeah, through Vanessa to the director. You're right, and one of the other challenges that we have is it's not only detecting them at those low levels; it's detecting them at the time that they smell the nuisance odor. So you know, if they're smelling it as Director Deck said at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night, well, the engineering firm that we had couldn't rush out there to put the detector that they had at the plant at that site. So it's like anything else, whether it's chlorine in the water or nuisance odor in the air. Everybody has different tolerances as well. So there is no real device to measure to that specific concentration, if you will.
Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a bit of a smile on my face here because I know exactly what these people are going through as far as odour is concerned, because as you well know, I have the same problem where I have. It is subjective, but it exists. Whether it's measurable or not, it exists, and it doesn't matter to what extent number one smells it or person number two smells it. It exists, whether it's measurable or not. Let's do something about it.
Director Deck.
Thank you for that, Director Wilson. And this is not, this is a serious problem. And so it's not just the few houses around the treatment plant, but it's also, you can also smell this when you're taking a hike on Bald Mountain. So I don't want to, I really wish that folks would not diminish these people's true hardships. And it's not just quality of life I'm talking, I'm also talking economic consequences. So I think this needs to be taken seriously, and we're starting with quick fixes, and some were suggested yesterday that I was grateful for, going up the scale until these folks don't have to suffer those kind of summer evenings when they should be playing with their grandchildren or enjoying a cocktail on their back porch or whatever patio. So anyway, I really feel like we need to take this seriously.
Okay, let's call the question then. All in favor? Anyone opposed? No one's opposed. Next item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next item is item R4, which is a report from the Emergency Management Division regarding CVRD Volunteer Fire Department's appointments process review. There is a recommendation. Would you like me to read it?
Maybe just hold off. I think Mr. Schooler's got a presentation.
No, just answer questions if anyone has concerns.
Well, could you just give us a refresher on what you're proposing here?
Sure. Having lived through the appointment process for the first time since joining the CBRD this fall, I've got questions and concerns on what that process looks like, if we could improve that process, amend it, avoid it being a popularity contest. A member steps out for a cup of coffee and comes back and he's the chief. I'd like to avoid that if possible. From what I understand in the past, a lot of times that has happened. The person that's the best friend of this guy gets the appointment, whereas maybe the most qualified candidate for the position was passed over. And I'd like to at least have a look at the process, not myself, but members from each department to form a working group to take a look at best practices, what other regions are doing, what other departments are doing, whether it's a part-time position, a full-time position, strictly a volunteer position, what have you. But let's have a look and see what other people are doing as well, and come back with some recommendations to the committee.
Thank you. Any questions? Director Siegel.
Thank you, Chair. In that big report that we just had the presentation on, I think in there were recommendations on the appointment process, and so I'm just wondering if we can move forward with those instead of developing a working group and going.
They kind of go hand in hand. I'd like to take the recommendations from the fire service report or review and put it in the hands of a working group to have a closer look at. And these are members that are from the department, and better to have them have a look at it as well.
Okay.
And
Yep.
make recommendations.
Thanks.
Director Morrison, did you have your hand?
Move the recommendation.
I think I've got another question first.
And so do I.
Director Martman and Director Wilson, I think.
Sorry, thanks, and through the staff. I'm interested in, I wasn't quite clear. Did you say that there were concerns coming from the fire department members that was driving this?
Not necessarily just the fire department members, Director. I tend to ask a lot of questions when I look at things, and I've got questions and concerns as well. I brought it up to our fire chiefs. They're in agreement that maybe we should take another look at this whole process.
Director Wilson?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Not a question, more an observation. If you're looking for members for that working group, I'd be more than happy to volunteer if you need somebody.
Thank you.
Director Abbott?
We've heard loud and clear that retaining and attracting members to the volunteer fire halls is a challenge. I commend staff for this recommendation. I think it's high time.
And it's part of that whole retention process as well, so engagement.
All right, Madam Secretary, Corporate Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that staff be directed to complete a review of the existing fire department appointment process. This review would include the formation of a working group to review the CVRD volunteer fire department appointments and to develop recommendations for changes and/or improvements to the appointment process and report back to the board for consideration of the recommendations.
Do I have someone to move it, please? A mover and a seconder? Would someone like to second? Thank you. Any more discussion? All in favor? Anyone opposed? It's carried. Thank you. All right, moving right along, we're down to R5.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R5 is a report from the Inspection and Enforcement Division regarding bylaw enforcement service review, and there is a 4-point recommendation before you. Would you like me to read it?
Yes, please.
Recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board, number 1, that the bylaw enforcement policy be reviewed and updated in consultation with electoral area directors following the board's strategic planning process. Number 2, that a new bylaw enforcement supervisor position be considered as part of the 2023 budget process. Number 3, that staff develop a bylaw dispute adjudication system framework. And number 4, that staff develop a bylaw enforcement service public information strategy.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. McDonald. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. McDonald? Director Morrison.
Yeah, thank you. Through you to Mr. McDonald, and I, I, I understand this because I got to sit in on the meeting and the review and what was done, and clearly by law enforcement was a priority of the previous board. But I'm also sitting here thinking that you know, this is an additional position. We've got new folks around this table that may not have had the exposure to the emphasis that the previous board had put on this, and also the work that was done. So I'm a little reluctant to suggest that we recommend that the position be included in the budget when we haven't done any strategic planning, we haven't had our those meetings, and some of the new folks around the table haven't really been exposed to the you know, emphasis that the previous board had had. So I'm wondering if there's a possibility, maybe even prior to starting the corporate strategic planning, whether we could have a little bit of an in-depth, I don't know whether we want to schedule a workshop, but an in-depth discussion as to how we got to this recommendation and how it would help the CVRD to better do bylaw enforcement.
Through you, Madam Chair, through to Director Morrison,
Yes.
absolutely, if the recommendation is put forward, we could arrange for a workshop or any future meeting to discuss that with panel, these directors, especially with the new directors.
Other comments? Director Acton?
Yeah, I think I agree with that, and I also have some questions around how these recommendations are going to improve, like how, well, one, actually, if like we can measure it somehow so that we know these are improving it, some kind of system like that. But also, I'm thinking about in Shawnee and Lake where the community and the CBRD spent a lot of money taking a landowner to court to enforce our zoning bylaws, and we were told that we did have the right to enforce it, and then currently it's definitely not being enforced, because otherwise to catch that person, we would have to have a bylaw officer there all the time. So it's really eroding the confidence of the community around bylaw. And so I don't remember reading any kind of solutions to situations like that, because we did talk about private investigators or that extra kind of thing. So would any of this cover situations like that?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm aware of the situation you're talking to, and that would be better off in close to explain that and why the perception is what it is. But these recommendations, I don't believe are addressing what you're talking about. You would be talking about having, that would be additional staff resources. We're already resource strapped, and that's why these recommendations came out as what they were. These, besides staff, these were by a consultant for those at the table that are not aware. So staff has reviewed as well as what we got back and fully support these. And it is really a situation where we're really short resources. It's a big area. We have more and more bylaws all the time, and to continually get the satisfaction of the boards. Now, this is one of the things that came out about the policy, and there's a second recommendation in my report, and one is that you only go for the to do the policy, because the policy is something that you would do with your strategic plan, and it's something that should be addressed with every time you have a new board, and that's something that was identified by Nielsen Strategies.
Director Martman has a question.
Maybe a question, probably more so a comment, because you know, we're in the business of serving people, and we serve them through making bylaws, and it makes natural progression that you better have a bylaw enforcement that's well enough to, you know, do the work, you know, to look after the work you're doing. And so I you know, I really appreciate Mr. Mr. McDonald and his entire department that do that and understand that they need support and we need support for our bylaws. And so I like this suggestion because coming in the by-election and finding out that there's all these reports and all these initiatives and where they're coming from and where they're going, I think that's very that's a wise move to make for the new directors because this is an ongoing cost. Once you put new positions in place, it's there for every year, and they'll be building off those as well. I know in my area, bylaw enforcement is one of the key things that they want in place because they have concerns and they're not getting the attention they think that whether they deserve at times. So I guess I would like to just keep this moving and not lose momentum. Thank you.
Director McClintock.
What was the vote of the board that brought this resolution forward? Was it unanimous or the previous?
If you recall, there was a review done of bylaw enforcement that we discussed in, I think,
That was then?
a closed meeting,
right.
yes, and these recommendations come directly out of that.
Okay, thank you.
Director Morrison.
I don't like to sort of do things on the fly, but I'm wondering if it might be appropriate to amend the resolution so that 1 and 2 allow for the review and update of the consultation around the strategic planning process, that the bylaw enforcement position be considered as part of the 2023 budget, which will be in the early new year. And then after number 2, I would insert that, and following a workshop with electoral area directors in early 2023, then numbers 3 and 4. So that they can begin the work, they can put the numbers into the budget, it can all be considered. Then the impetus to get a workshop in place for staff or for the committee, and then once that workshop is done, they can begin with 3 and 4. So I would move that amendment.
Do I have a seconder? I have a seconder. Any discussion about what Director Morrison has moved? Can I call the question? All in favor? Anyone opposed? Great. We could take a quick 5-minute break and then come back and finish the last item.
Got to call the resolution on the vote on the main resolution.
Was it on the table? I didn't think it was. Oh, sorry. I thought it was, I thought it hadn't been moved yet. Yes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For clarification, the recommendation that you just passed was that the main motion be amended. So you amended the main motion. So procedurally, you now have to vote on the main motion as amended.
As amended. All right. Next time, Mr. Director Morrison, please just fix the motion so I don't get confused. Okay, on the main motion, all in favor? Great. Anyone opposed? Nope. It's carried. Same outcome. Take a break. Welcome back, everyone. We have one more report, R6.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R6 is a report from the Community Planning Division regarding Shawnigan Lake Suites regulation. And this was referred from the May 25th, 2022 board meeting. There is a 3-part recommendation before you.
Thank you. Mr. Tippett is here to explain it to me.
is a refinement of a report that this committee saw, gosh, I forget the month, it was probably in the summer sometime, which was...
Sorry, I'm not hearing anything, Madam Chair.
Excuse me. I thought I had pressed that button. Sorry. Let me start over. I will try to explain it. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. The report here is the second iteration of a report which came to this committee earlier this year. I believe it was in the late spring or early summer, and was referred following that initial appearance at this committee to the Advisory Planning Commission for Shawnigan Lake. I believe it was August where we held a meeting out there with the APC. I was there, and we discussed the former version of this staff report around the possibility of increasing access to suites, legal suites in the Shawnigan Lake area. And the report quickly summarizes the comments from the APC. They weren't particularly interested in the idea of increasing access to suites, not so much because they weren't in favor of attainable housing, is what I could surmise, but it was more around concern about the total capacity of growth that they have available in their village area based on the LizTech water system, which they were indicating has roughly 175 single-family residential unit equivalent spare capacity at this time. And so anyway, having considered that, I have rewritten the report, and essentially to summarize it, option one is the option which was originally recommended in the earlier version of the report, where we very much liberalize access to suites in the entire electoral area, including getting rid of a special clause in the secondary suite and what we call small suite or freestanding suite regulation that interdicts them if they're within 60 meters of Shawnigan Lake or if it's on a waterfront property. So that's option one. That's what I recommended earlier before it went to the APC, but that's not what I'm recommending this time. This time I'm recommending liberalizing the suite regulations but not changing those special water setback regulations. That's option two. And the third option is basically to do nothing other than a correction to an existing typographical error in the numbering of the sections of the bylaw, which actually has no effect on the access to suites. So this is characterized as a pilot. Well, I should be clear what I mean by that. It would, if we did make this change, there'd be a zoning amendment for Shawnigan Lake. It would, there's no intent necessarily to roll it back in the future or just have it in effect for a certain period of time. It's something that we would introduce and then maybe a year or two later report back to committee on how much uptake there's been on it, whether there's any problems known to have occurred as a result of it, and maybe fine tune it further at that point. And I'll leave it at that. If there are any questions, I'll try to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Acton.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tippett, for the report and for bringing it to the APC. After, I wasn't actually, unfortunately, I wasn't at that meeting, but after talking to the APC, I wasn't actually 100% sure they understood what the intent was of trying to reduce the limitations for suites, but because I know they had some concerns that it would, specifically around the lake, that it would increase Airbnb usage, and so that's pretty much, that is happening already, regardless, and I think we should be encouraging more Airbnbs around the lake because they're happening in the community. I know several people will have larger properties, they have a carriage house, and they're using that as an Airbnb, but it has no view, it doesn't have that, but it's taking away housing stock for people to have as a rental. There's that, because people, generally, obviously a lot of the properties on the lake are very expensive, high property tax, so in order for many people to keep those properties, they're having to rent them out anyway. So, but I guess my question is, I'm wondering if engineering has any comments about this, if they have been shared the report.
Mr. Tippett.
Madam Chair, thank you. We did discuss the matter with the Health Authority because probably our biggest concern potentially in opening up additional suite density on lots which are, let's say, at a minimum parcel size in the R2 or R3 zone already was, would that overload it with septic or not? And the answer we got back is the new process, the professional reliance model, which is outlined a little bit in the report, in their opinion, in their professional opinion, is sufficient to deal with that prospect of some additional units. And so they didn't express any concern about this proposal. Specifically, CVRD engineering wasn't really part of the main consideration of it, mainly because the principal service provider is Lidstech, which is a private utility. I think the report was referred to well, maybe it was the now former department that had utilities in it. But I can't remember specifically engaging with them on the water side of it in Shawnigan Beach Estates, for example.
Yep.
Thank you. Just one more question then. So if we did it as a test pilot, we could revisit the lake implication, I get, in a year when we're discussing it again. But I'm wondering, do we have any idea of how many opportunities this would open up? Or like how many this could apply to?
That's, Madam Chair, a very good question. That is a question that the APC asked as well. And one of the, well, the answer I had for them, which is the same answer I have for this committee, is we haven't studied in detail how many additional suite opportunities would be opened up if we were to, for example, in the R3 zone, say if you have 0.2 hectares of land, which is the minimum lot size, you can now have a suite. How many that would actually add, potentially. I mean, it could be quite a large number. On the other side of that issue is the fact that there are already known to be a number of not legal suites. I think this whole report sort of sprang out of another application that we had to try to legalize 3 of those not legal suites on Kia Crescent, and I think that's probably not an unusual neighborhood. So it's really hard to give you a clear answer. It could potentially be hundreds of suites, you know, if you look at all of the properties that would be affected by the change that I'm proposing with option 2. Would it actually be hundreds? I don't know. It depends on a bunch of circumstances, you know, the individual owner's desires, whether there are already illegal suites in a lot of those places, in which case they would probably try to get them legalized rather than, you know, actually adding real new density. So this is the kind of thing that could be done in more depth if we had a very specific study on this matter. But the challenge with that is it would take quite a while to put together the facts and figures on all of the communities, because I think probably most of the directors on this table, if not all of them, think that this is an issue in their community as well. And meanwhile, we have a crisis on our hands, right? So this is sort of an interim measure that is worthy of consideration. If you're not sure about it, though, you know, don't make a decision in the absence of information you think is essential. So I'll leave it at that.
Director Wilson?
Oh, could I have?
Oh,
one
sorry.
more?
Yeah.
Sorry.
One more.
I do think it is worthy to at least give it a try. My last question for now is, I'm not sure if you remember this, or maybe you probably remember instances where this happened, but I believe it was 2014, somewhere around there, we changed the bylaw like, for example, in Area B, I'm thinking of some examples around Lover's Lane, where the lot was reduced, so they have a house and a carriage house, so I have an example of somebody who built the carriage house first, and then we made the requirement for that to be bigger, so they're stuck in the carriage house and not able to build the main house. So would that help? Will this help people in that? Is that ringing a bell? That bylaw that was changed, it was like, I think it was from a hectare, or it was like 1 point something to a hectare. So will it help people like that? Because there's a few examples.
Madam Chair, I think I know what Director Acting is talking about. the first iteration, I think my report states this, of the suite regulations in the CVRD from 1995 until maybe 2014 or thereabouts, permitted suites, yeah, it was 2014. It was the adoption of the South Cowichan zoning bylaw, and then we made a similar amendment to Area B. Said that you could have a suite on fully unserviced property. So like if you had a single, a lot that was, say, 0.4 hectares in area, it did not have community water service, it did not have community sewer service, the minimum lot size was at least 1 hectare and probably more, you could still have a suite. And then in 2014 or end of 2013, when the South Cowichan zoning came in, and shortly after that we amended Area B as well, that was up to 1 hectare. And so your question is, would this amendment help any of those people? And the short answer is it may, because I'm proposing that the threshold for lot size for unserviced parcels go down from 1 hectare to 0.5, which is not as low as 0.4, but it's moving in the direction to potentially legalize some of those ones that became legal non-conforming after 2014.
Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, and a couple of the points actually I was going to bring up have already been brought up by Director Acton. I like this report. I like the intent of the report because you're right, there is a crisis which we need to address, and this addresses it, some of those quite well. There are a lot of safeguards that you've built into it as well, which is very good. Now, this is, to me, it's a much needed revision of some of the bylaws we have in place here. And in this respect, as we've discussed, and the same with, I've discussed with Director Acton, we have a very similar situation in Cobble Hill with a resident who contacted me. And I'm just wondering whether it's possible to include Area C in this particular, what would that entail to get something like this started for Area C as a matter of some urgency is not the right word, but you know what I mean, right?
With your permission, Madam Chair, to answer Director Wilson's question, well, there's a couple of ways to answer that question. I mean, this committee has the power to recommend to the board that we amend bylaws in any way, virtually immediately, as soon as staff can write amendments. So let's just talk about the Area B component of it right now, which is the subject of the report. If this committee says that, yes, we'd like to proceed with option 1 or 2, my next task is to write an amendment bylaw, get it on an upcoming board agenda, and get readings going and talk about whether there'll be a public hearing or not and that sort of thing. So if Area C and Area A or any other electoral area wanted a similar thing to be done at the same time, bylaw preparation straight out of this report, we could do that, and it could be really quick. On the other hand, you may wish, like Director Acton did, to refer the matter to your advisory planning commissions for a little bit more thoughtful review first, in which case I'd be happy to attend any such meetings to essentially do what we did with Area B and talk about the possibility of interim amendments.
Yeah, that would be a good idea, actually. Follow up. Yeah, that would be a good idea to refer it to the APC. So I'll take some guidance from Kathleen or the chair as to our next steps there. But there is a mention in the report of a more thorough policy review on that. That would actually give you time to do that, I would think, on there. Because one of the questions that came up was how many suites would be affected. That's a big question. And as far as I know, GIS has some pretty powerful tools up there to be able to select those areas they can and come up with a pretty accurate answer. So I would hope that GIS would be included. Engineering, we've already talked about, definitely. And strategic initiative as part of their local area plans and MOCP stuff as well. So I'm glad this is getting going. It is something which I think needs to be addressed, and I really is a very good report. Thank you, Mr. Tippett, and I'll see if we can get something going for Area C as well. Thank you.
Director Acton, you want to move it? Director Acton's moved option 2. Would anyone like to second it? Great. Director Morrison.
So, thank you, and I thought I had a good grip on this report when I read it, and now I'm not so sure. So, I'm just, through to staff, it seemed to me that the intent of this initially was to create additional units for, to alleviate some of the housing crisis. And, you know, I see where it's going on that front. And I think that the anticipation of there being more long-term rentals is a good thing. I also know that just from some recent experience with folks who have turned away from the long-term rental and are in a sense cashing in on short-term rentals, you know, a septic system is not really designed to have, you know, significant usage by a lot of people over a short time, like over a long weekend. And we hear of difficulties that people have when they get into the short-term rental market and their septic systems can be overwhelmed. So I guess what my question is the intent and the regulation in this going to sufficiently, you know, increase the long-term rental opportunities and inventory? And is there significant safeguards against people just, you know, making an economic decision and deciding that they're going to get into the short-term rental market, and that's going to be a way of them, you know, paying off their mortgage? So what are your thoughts on that?
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you. That's a very good question. I know Director Acton mentioned this sort of before in earlier comments, and the reality is that even though we know Airbnb operates in a lot of our communities, for the most part, they operate in areas where they're actually not operating in conformity with the zoning. There are a couple of exceptions to that. I think Director Deck has a couple of zones in her area which permit both short and long-term, you know, rentals or occupancy, but that's the exception. The rule generally in residential zones is no, you're supposed to live there and pay at least a monthly rent. So the short answer is it should, in quotation marks, at, you know, whatever, any new suite created should become available for rental, a long-term rental. Will they all? Probably not, which is then rolls back into the bylaw enforcement side of it. And, you know, so I guess philosophically, you can either say, well, we're not going to do it if any of those units go towards short-term rental, which maybe isn't, you know, the best approach. But on the other hand, going the other way, knowing that some of them are going to be used not in conformity with the bylaw is a tough decision. I get it. But the only assurance I can give is at the moment, and I can't see it in the future either, that I don't think we're going to be opening up most residential zones for short-term rentals. The exceptions in Area I are for kind of recreational properties. I mean, they always were intended as such, so it's not pervasive in Area I. It's just a couple of locations.
Okay, any more?
I guess just, would it be possible, is it that hard to actually get a report from GIS to understand how many, like maybe we could just get that later, how many suites or how many properties this will kind of, you know, change the landscape or possibility for?
Through Madam Chair, yes, it might be, but I know GIS is very heavily engaged right now with other projects, and so it might be a challenge to do that in a timely fashion. What I can say for the, you know, on the face of it, assuming that a suite maybe uses in engineering sort of unit allocation terminology half of a connection that a normal home would use. So in other words, if you have 180 units of water available on Lids Tech system in Shawnigan Village, that's either 180 single-family dwellings or possibly 360 suites. So I think no matter what the number is from GIS, the reality is probably the most you would ever get is the number of suites I just said.
Right.
And that's not going to happen overnight. I suspect, I mean, I think the number is interesting, but it's not necessarily going to, you know, it might be substantially higher than 360. And I don't even think that if we did this and there was no limitation of water, there'd be 360 of these created, because, you know, maybe there's 10% uptake or something like that.
I guess it would just, just as a comment to staff, maybe something can be done. It would be great if we let our building inspectors know that we're kind of like looking at this. Does it, did it create something? If they can kind of track, how many they think, how many, suites are being added because of this decision might help for the other areas. Anyway.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if we do
Thanks.
proceed with this proposed amendment, then I will report back to committee, maybe next year, roughly after, or a year after its adoption, just to try to keep track of, whether it's enhanced. We'll have to do a bit of analysis too, because it's not just new suites. It's new suites that would not have been permitted now, but are permitted it by right of the change. So, maybe get a better sense of it by that reporting time.
Thank you. If it's a pilot, it would be really important to do that so that we learn from it. Yeah, so we need to think about that information. Yep, Director Wilson.
Yeah, just to allay some of the points that were brought up by Ian. I understand the concerns about long and short-term rentals there. The reason I'm interested in this is from one of the residents that came to me and wants to build a habitation, call it what you like, guest suite for people, for his relatives to live in, but just happens to be just underneath that size where it's allowed. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for, where it's friends and family as opposed to the rental market, that kind of thing. Thank you.
Director Siegel.
Thank you, Chair. I've spoken to Mr. Tippett about this since this topic piqued my interest the same way it did with Director Wilson, and I'm just unsure of the process. I would also like for Area A to look at an interim amendment to our bylaws around secondary suites, and I don't know if that something official needs to be said now, or if that's like a conversation that happens outside.
Mr. Tippett, what do you think?
Madam Chair, I think you need to make a resolution on the subject of the report and then maybe a subsequent resolution. Fortunately, you and Director Wilson share a bylaw, so that would be easy to.
Okay, so.
Okay, let's deal with this one then first, shall we? Yeah. Anything else? Director Martman, you okay? No, Director Acton has something.
Sorry, I had one other question about the 50 meters on the lake. I imagine that most properties or most dwellings are closer than that, almost probably every single one that's built on the lake. So is that 50 meters our current regulation, or it's changing? Is that the changing from 30 to 50?
Okay, Madam Chair, to try to clarify the question of Director Acton, option 2, which I think is the one on the floor, if I'm not mistaken, is the one where we would not be changing the setback from the lake part of the suite regulations. So that would mean that waterfront properties or sites within 60 meters of the lake could not have suites. If it's your intention for them to have suites, you should recommend option 1.
No, what is it now, though?
It's 60 meters now.
Oh, okay.
And option 2 does not change that. Option 1 does eliminate that. The 30 meter to 50 meter thing is actually the Cook-Sila River, which was another matter related to appropriate setbacks from that river, and that's something that is proposed, I think, in all of the options.
Okay, can we call a question? All in favor? Anyone opposed? That motion carried. And Director Wilson, you like to make a motion?
I'm halfway through writing it, and I'm sure that that Ms. Harrison will put me right. That further to the intent of staff report 6520-20, staff be directed to investigate the possibility of amending bylaws XXX in relation to areas A and C.
Madam Chair, I would recommend that if your intention is that it go to your advisory planning commissions,
Yes.
that I prepare a report for your 2 advisory planning commissions and attend those meetings, and it will be on this subject.
Brilliant. Is that okay?
Yep. Is that okay? All right, so we have a seconder? Okay, seconded. Would you like to speak to this?
Thank you. Yes, I can support something that we should try and make as many kind of like small decisions that could help in any way in our housing shortage. And, but I guess I'm thinking, since this is a pilot, we should probably have maybe a time period so that we can kind of study that it was a good idea in area B first before jumping ahead. And so maybe it's not a year, maybe it's 6 months, so that there's probably a whole list of things we could be chipping away at that,
Madam
would
Chair,
help.
if Director Atkins asking my opinion on that, it's really up to the other members around this table to decide that, how wide or narrow any pilot program should be, and we're happy to do the committee's desires.
I guess if you're going to do a pilot program, you have to ask the question, what are you trying to learn from this? And is the goal just to increase the number of suites? Because if that's the case, then yeah, it's kind of different. Director Morrison.
Yeah, and I think through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Tippett had indicated that this, well, he called it a pilot project. It wasn't necessarily a pilot project because we're not going to come back in 6 months or a year and reverse this. So I'm more inclined to, well, I don't want to frustrate the desires of the directors from Area A and C. I'm also thinking about the fact that we're doing corporate strategic planning in the new year, and we are going to be directing the organization for the next 4 years on what the priorities are, and clearly this is a priority for the two directors. I think that before we front load and send staff off doing a fair bit of work for maybe just these two to start, but other areas as well, we should probably have the discussion as a group of electoral area directors at corporate strategic planning, and then the board as a whole, so that we're all, committed to this course of work being done throughout the course of this term. So I'm saying, let's get some preliminary work done on this. It's not a pilot project. If they're going to do it, they'll probably end up adopting bylaws or amendments to bylaws that will make it a permanent feature of their zoning. So I think we should probably have a discussion as a group at corporate strategic planning before we actually start that ball rolling.
Director Siegel.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'd just like to say that I think the intention is to deal with the suites that are already there. With the housing crisis that's going on, there are secondary suites just getting created, there's trailers being put on properties, there's tiny homes being put on properties. That's just already either happened or is happening all the time, and it just feels like our bylaw is really behind on that. And I know that there is a bigger zoning project coming up that's going to roll out summer of 2024, but to make at least an interim amendment to deal with what's actually happening on the ground in our areas right now is important.
Thank you. Director Wilson?
What she said. But
Great.
basically,
Right.
yes, this is exactly what I was going to say. And let's talk about priorities. The housing crisis is not new. It's been going on for a couple of years. We've talked about it for a couple of years. I think we may have talked about it at the last strategic planning 3 or 4 years ago. This is something that we can do now. This is something that we can address now as a matter of some urgency. And as far as pilots are concerned, there's plurality here. We don't need to have one pilot. We can have 3 pilots going at the same time here. But let's get it started, and that's the intent of this resolution, to at least start the process now, as opposed to putting it off to whenever. Thank you.
Okay, and so the idea would be to try and figure out how many new suites and how many legalized suites that we end up getting in a year.
If I may say, Madam Chair, I think a further engagement with the 2 APCs for the directors who just spoke would be helpful to the new zoning that we're working on for all of the region, in fact. And so, if there's a question, if there's concern that the staff resources may not be available or it's going to interrupt some other projects, I always aim to maintain a little bit of ability to take on special issues like this, but I would also make the argument, as I just did, that it's actually part of what we would be doing in the course of developing that new region-wide zoning anyway. So that's just for your consideration.
Perfect, let's call the question. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Nope. All right, thank you. Moving on, we are going down now to question period. Thank you. Anyone like to ask a question?
Madam Chair, I am Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake. Madam Chair, we had an excellent presentation on the expansion for the Malahat fire area. And Mr. Anderson stated that he has written a report for the CVRD. May the public get a copy of that report?
Yes, I think it's, has it been posted yet? Tomorrow it will be posted. Yes, definitely.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's very nice. One thing I learned out of that report was you don't put a fire hall on a dead-end road.
No.
So I guess that eliminates Elkington Forest for a fire hall. So is it possible that this committee could have a look at the amenities of Elkington Forest, including the fire hall, and see where we stand on that? Because the old board did say that the building and the amenities would be built simultaneously. I don't see anything built, none of our amenities. So maybe could this committee have another look at that, please?
Right, well, I'm sure I'm sure Ms. Cheroff will speak with Mr. Postings and get it all sorted out as they move forward with that Malahat review.
Well, thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I'll promise to go easy on you. A very interesting meeting today. One of the questions I had was to do with the presentation from Miss Lindsay Yerk, I think her name is how you pronounce it. And we're talking about the overlap of local area plans with neighboring electoral areas. And I'm wondering, will there be a framework created to have joint APCs and what those parameters would be?
I don't have the answer for that. I think that is in the future to be decided, but I am sure that they would. We have in the past, certainly when we were starting if you're speaking specifically of Satlam, when we did the local area plan, it was a joint Area F, Area E group of people, group of residents. So I'm sure that we will make sure that happens because it's really important that people who are affected have a voice.
That's right. And when I'm referring to that was in the creation of it, but once the local area plans are done, when it comes to land use matters, that there should be a joint advisory planning commission, much like there is in the South End.
Yeah, take that as good advice.
Thank you.
Well, I think the point that Ms. Kaufman's making is that when we have a local area plan, there should be a group associated with it to look at applications.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. The other topic I wanted to speak to was on the other delegation with Mr. Gordon Anderson about the fire service review. It was very informative, as you and this committee know, but maybe not all the new directors. Satlam has been waiting a long time for a a review of our existing facilities. Made me a little nervous with the amount of information and budgets and costs. And I'm wondering, Madam Chair, we, as a community, were told we had to wait for this service review of Malahat to be done. Do you know, or could you inquire as to when Satlam would be subject to a review that we've been waiting a long time for?
As soon as I know, I will let you know.
Would it be a priority?
It is I think it's next in line.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
Thank you. Great first meeting. Thanks.
Okay, so now we have to call for adjournment, I guess. There is no closed meeting, and it was a long meeting, so thank you all for your patience. Made it through. We'll try and tighten it up for next time. Could I have a motion to adjourn? And second, and all in favor? Have a nice evening.